Section 47 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 47. That kind of life most happy, which affords us most opportunities of gaining our own esteem. The Adventurer, Tuesday, November the 27th, 1753. Quae non fecimus ipsi, vix a nostra voco. Ovid. The deeds of long-descended ancestors are but by grace of imputation ours. Dryden. The evils inseparably annexed to the present condition of man are so numerous and afflictive, that it has been from age to age the task of some to bewail and of others to solace them, and he therefore will be in danger of seeing a common enemy who shall attempt to depreciate the few pleasures and felicities which nature has allowed us. Yet I will confess that I have sometimes employed my thoughts in examining the pretensions that have been made to happiness by the splendid and envied condition of life, and have not thought the hour unprofitably spent when I have detected the imposture of counterfeit advantages, and found disquiet lurking under false appearances of gaiety and greatness. It is asserted by a tragic poet that est miser nemo nisi comparatus. No man is miserable, but as he is compared with others, happier than himself. This position is not strictly and philosophically true. He might have said with rigorous propriety that no man is happy, but as he is compared with the miserable. For such is the state of this world, that we find it absolute misery, but happiness only comparative. We may incur as much pain as we can possibly endure, though we never can obtain as much happiness as we might possibly enjoy. Yet it is certain likewise that many of our miseries are merely comparative. We are often made unhappy not by the presence of any real evil, but by the absence of some fictitious good, of something which is not required by any real want of nature, which has not in itself any power of gratification, and which neither reason nor fancy would have prompted us to wish, did we not see it in the possession of others. For a mind diseased with vain longings after unattainable advantages, no medicine can be prescribed but an impartial inquiry into the real worth of that which is so ardently desired. It is well known how much the mind as well as the eye is deceived by distance, and perhaps it will be found that of many imagined blessings it may be doubted whether he that wants or possesses them has more reason to be satisfied with his lot. The dignity of high birth and long extraction no man to whom nature has denied it can confer upon himself, and therefore it deserves to be considered whether the want of that which never can be gained may not easily be endured. It is true that if we consider the triumph and delight with which most of those recount their ancestors who have ancestors to recount, and the artifices by which some who have risen to unexpected fortune endeavour to insert themselves into an honourable stem, we shall be inclined to fancy that wisdom or virtue may be had by inheritance, or that all the excellencies of a line of progenitors are accumulated on their descendants. Reason indeed will soon inform us that our estimation of birth is arbitrary and capricious, and that dead ancestors can have no influence but upon imagination. Let it then be examined whether one dream may not operate in the place of another, whether he that owes nothing to forefathers may not receive equal pleasure from the consciousness of owing all to himself, whether he may not, with a little meditation, find it more honourable to found than to continue a family, and to gain dignity than transmit it. Whether, if he receives no dignity from the virtues of his family, he does not likewise escape the danger of being disgraced by their crimes, and whether he that brings a new name into the world has not the convenience of playing the game of life without a stake, and opportunity of winning much, though he has nothing to lose. There is another opinion concerning happiness which approaches much more nearly to universality, but which may perhaps with equal reason be disputed. Their pretensions to ancestral honours many of the sons of earth easily see to be ill-grounded, but all agree to celebrate the advantage of hereditary riches, and to consider those as minions of fortune who are wealthy from their cradles, whose estate is res non para labore sed relicta, the acquisition of another, not of themselves, and whom a father's industry has dispensed from a laborious attention to arts or commerce, and left at liberty to dispose of life as fancy shall direct them. If every man were wise and virtuous, capable to discern the best use of time, and resolute to practice it, it might be granted, I think, without hesitation, that total liberty would be a blessing, and that it would be desirable to be left at large to the exercise of religious and social duties, without the interruption of importunate avocations. But since felicity is relative, and that which is the means of happiness to one man may be to another the cause of misery, we are to consider what state is best adapted to human nature in its present degeneracy and frailty. And surely to far the greater number it is highly expedient that they should, by some settled scheme of duties, be rescued from the tyranny of caprice, that they should be driven on by necessity through the paths of life, with their attention confined to a stated task, that they may be less at leisure to deviate into mischief at the call of folly. When we observe the lives of those whom an ample inheritance has let loose to their own direction, what do we discover that can excite our envy? Their time seems not to pass with much applause from others, or satisfaction to themselves. Many squander their exuberance of fortune in luxury and debauchery, and have no other use of money than to inflame their passions and riot in a wide range of licentiousness. Others, less criminal indeed, but surely not much to be praised, lie down to sleep, and rise up to trifle, are employed every morning in finding expedients to rid themselves of the day, chase pleasure through all the places of public resort, fly from London to Bath, and from Bath to London, without any other reason for changing place, but that they go in quest of company, as idle and as vagrant as themselves, always endeavouring to raise some new desire, that they may have something to pursue, to rekindle some hope which they know will be disappointed, changing one amusement for another, which a few months will make equally insipid, or sinking into languor and disease for want of something to actuate their bodies or exhilarate their minds. Whoever has frequented those places where idlers assemble to escape from solitude knows that this is generally the state of the wealthy, and from this state it is no great hardship to be debarred. No man can be happy in total idleness. He that should be condemned to lie torpid and motionless would fly for recreation, says South, to the mines and the galleys. And it is well when nature or fortune find employment for those who would not have known how to procure it for themselves. He whose mind is engaged by the acquisition or improvement of a fortune not only escapes the insipidity of indifference and the tediousness of inactivity, but gains enjoyments wholly unknown to those who live lazily on the toil of others, For life affords no higher pleasure than that of surmounting difficulties, passing from one step of success to another, forming new wishes and seeing them gratified. He that labours in any great or laudable undertaking has his fatigues first supported by hope, and afterwards rewarded by joy. He is always moving to a certain end, and when he has attained it, an end more distant invites him to a new pursuit. It does not indeed always happen that diligence is fortunate. The wisest schemes are broken by unexpected accidents. The most constant perseverance sometimes toils through life without a recompense. But labour, though unsuccessful, is more eligible than idleness. He that prosecutes a lawful purpose by lawful means acts always with the approbation of his own reason. He is animated through the course of his endeavours by an expectation which, though not certain, he knows to be just, and is at last comforted in his disappointment by the consciousness that he has not failed by his own fault. That kind of life is most happy which affords us most opportunities of gaining our own esteem. And what can any man infer in his own favour from a condition to which, however prosperous, he contributed nothing, and which the vilest and weakest of the species would have obtained by the same right, had he happened to be the son of the same father? To strive with difficulties and to conquer them is the highest human felicity. The next is to strive and deserve to conquer. But he whose life has passed without a contest, and who can boast neither success nor merit, can survey himself only as a useless filler of existence, and if he is content with his own character, must owe his satisfaction to insensibility. Thus it appears that the satirist advised rightly when he directed us to resign ourselves to the hands of heaven, and to leave to superior powers the determination of our lot. Permittes ipsis expendere numinibus, quid conveniat nobis, rebusque sit utile nostris, cario is illis homo quam sibi. Entrust thy fortune to the powers above, leave them to manage for thee, and to grant what their unerring wisdom sees thee want. In goodness as in greatness they excel. Ah, that we loved ourselves but half so well. Dryden. What state of life admits most happiness is uncertain, but that uncertainty ought to repress the petulance of comparison, and silence the murmurs of discontent. End of section 47.
Section 48 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim McDougall. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 48. Our present state, one of danger and infelicity. Saturday, December 29th, 1753. Ultima semper expectanda dies homini, disique beatus antiobitum, nemo supremaque funera debet. Ovid. But no frail man, however great or high, can be concluded blessed before he die. Addison. The numerous miseries of human life have extorted in all ages an universal complaint. The wisest of men terminated all his experiments in search of happiness by the mournful confession that all is vanity, and the ancient patriarchs lamented that the days of their pilgrimage were few and evil. There is indeed no topic on which it is more superfluous to accumulate authorities nor any assertion of which our own eyes will more easily discover, or our sensations more frequently impress the truth, than that misery is the lot of man, that our present state is a state of danger and infelicity. When we take the most distant prospect of life, what does it present us but a chaos of unhappiness, a confused and tumultuous scene of labor and contest, disappointment and defeat? If we view past ages in the reflection of history, what do they offer to our meditation but crimes and calamities? One year is distinguished by a famine, another by an earthquake. Kingdoms are made desolate, sometimes by wars, and sometimes by pestilence. The peace of the world is interrupted at one time by the caprices of a tyrant, at another by the rage of a conqueror. The memory is stored only with the vicissitudes of evil, and the happiness, such as it is, of one part of mankind, is found to arise commonly from sanguinary success, from victories which confer upon them the power not so much of improving life by any new enjoyment, as of inflicting misery on others, and gratifying their own pride by comparative greatness. But by him that examines life with a more close attention, the happiness of the world will be found still less than it appears. In some intervals of public prosperity, or to use terms more proper, in some intermissions of calamity, a general diffusion of happiness may seem to be overspread to people. All is triumph and exultation, jollity and plenty. There are no public fears and dangers, and no complainings in the streets. But the condition of individuals is very little mended by this general calm. Pain and malice and discontent still continue their havoc. The silent depredation goes incessantly forward, and the grave continues to be filled by the victims of sorrow. He that enters a gay assembly beholds the cheerfulness displayed in every countenance, and finds all sitting vacant and disengaged, with no other attention than to give or to receive pleasure, would naturally imagine that he had reached at last the metropolis of felicity, the place sacred to gladness of heart, from whence all fear and anxiety were irreversibly excluded. Such indeed we may often find to be the opinion of those who from a lower station look up to the pomp and gaiety which they cannot reach. But who is there of those who frequent luxurious assemblies that will not confess his own uneasiness, or cannot recount the vexations and distresses that prey upon the lives of his gay companions? The world, in its best state, is nothing more than a larger assembly of beings, combining to counterfeit happiness which they do not feel, employing every art and contrivance to embellish life, and to hide their real condition from the eyes of one another. The species of happiness most obvious to the observation of others is that which depends upon the goods of fortune, yet even this is often fictitious. There is in the world more poverty than is generally imagined, not only because many whose possessions are large have desires still larger, and many measure their wants by the gratifications which others enjoy, but great numbers are pressed by real necessities, which it is their chief ambition to conceal, and are forced to purchase the appearance of competence and cheerfulness at the expense of many comforts and conveniences of life. Many, however, are confessedly rich, and many more are sufficiently removed from all danger of real poverty. But it has been long ago remarked that money cannot purchase quiet. The highest of mankind can promise themselves no exemption from that discord or suspicion by which the sweetness of domestic retirement is destroyed, and must always be even more exposed, in the same degree as they are elevated above others, to the treachery of dependents, the calumny of defamers, and the violence of opponents. Affliction is inseparable from our present state. It adheres to all the inhabitants of this world, in different proportions indeed, but with an allotment which seems very little regulated by our own conduct. It has been the boast of some swelling moralists that every man's fortune was in his own power, that prudence supplied the place of all other divinities, and that happiness is the unfailing consequence of virtue. But surely the quiver of omnipotence is stored with arrows, against which the shield of human virtue, however adamantine it has been boasted, is held up in vain. We do not always suffer by our crimes. We are not always protected by our innocence. A good man is by no means exempt from the danger of suffering by the crimes of others. Even his goodness may raise him enemies of implacable malice and restless perseverance. The good man has never been warranted by heaven from the treachery of friends, the disobedience of children, or the dishonesty of a wife. He may see his cares made useless by profusion, his instructions defeated by perverseness, and his kindness rejected by ingratitude. He may languish under the infamy of false accusations, or perish reproachfully by an unjust sentence. A good man is subject, like other mortals, to all the influences of natural evil. His harvest is not spared by the tempest, nor his cattle by the murrain. His house flames like others in a conflagration, nor have his ships any peculiar power of resisting hurricanes. His mind, however elevated, inhabits a body subject to innumerable casualties, of which he must always share the dangers and the pains. He bears about him the seeds of disease, and may linger away a great part of his life under the tortures of the gout or stone, at one time groaning with insufferable anguish, at another dissolved in listlessness and languor. From this general and indiscriminate distribution of misery, the moralists have always derived one of their strongest moral arguments for a future state. For since the common events of the present life happen alike to the good and bad, it follows from the justice of the Supreme Being that there must be another state of existence, in which a just retribution shall be made, and every man shall be happy and miserable according to his works. The miseries of life may, perhaps, afford some proof of a future state compared as well with the mercy as the justice of God. It is scarcely to be imagined that infinite benevolence would create a being capable of enjoying so much more than is here to be enjoyed, and qualified by nature to prolong pain by remembrance, and anticipated by terror, if he was not designed for something nobler and better than a state in which many of his faculties can serve only for his torment, in which he is to be importuned by desires that never can be satisfied, to feel many evils which he had no power to avoid, and to fear many which he shall never feel. There will surely come a time when every capacity of happiness shall be filled, and none shall be wretched but by his own fault. In the meantime, it is by affliction chiefly that the heart of man is purified, and that the thoughts are fixed upon a better state. Prosperity, allayed and imperfect as it is, has power to intoxicate the imagination, to fix the mind upon the present scene, to produce confidence and elation, and to make him who enjoys affluence and honors forget the hand by which they were bestowed. It is seldom that we are otherwise than by affliction awakened to a sense of our own imbecility, or taught to know how little all our acquisitions can conduce to safety or to quiet, and how justly we may ascribe to the superintendence of a higher power those blessings which in the wantonness of success we considered as the attainments of our policy or courage. Nothing confers so much ability to resist the temptations that perpetually surround us as an habitual consideration of the shortness of life, and the uncertainty of those pleasures that solicit our pursuit. And this consideration can be inculcated only by affliction. O death, how bitter is the remembrance of thee to a man that lives at ease in his possessions! If our present state were one continued succession of delights, or one uniform flow of calmness and tranquillity, we should never willingly think upon its end. Death would then surely surprise us as a thief in the night, and our task of duty would remain unfinished till the night came when no man can work. While affliction thus prepares us for felicity, we may console ourselves under its pressures by remembering that there are no particular marks of divine displeasure, since all the distresses of persecution have been suffered by those of whom the world was not worthy, and the Redeemer of mankind himself was a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. End of section 48.
Section 49 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 49, on the Duty of Self-Examination. The Adventurer, Tuesday, February 26th, 1754. T. Derexa, Pythagoras. What have I been doing? As man is a being very sparingly furnished with the power of prescience, he can provide for the future only by considering the past, and as futurity is all in which he has any real interest, he ought very diligently to use the only means by which he can be enabled to enjoy it, and frequently to revolve the experiments which he has hitherto made upon life, that he may gain wisdom from his mistakes and caution from his miscarriages. Though I do not so exactly conform to the precepts of Pythagoras as to practice every night this solemn recollection, yet I am not so lost in dissipation as wholly to omit it, nor can I forbear sometimes to inquire of myself in what employment my life has passed away. Much of my time has sunk into nothing, and left no trace by which it can be distinguished, and of this I now only know, that it was once in my power, and might once have been improved. Note 22, Appendix. It was his custom to observe certain days with a pious abstraction, viz., New Year's Day, the day of his wife's death, Good Friday, Easter Day, and his own birthday. He, this year, 1764, says, quote, I have now spent 55 years in resolving, having from the earliest time almost that I can remember, being forming schemes of a better life. I have done nothing. The need of doing, therefore, is pressing, since the time of doing is short. O God, grant me to resolve aright, and to keep my resolutions for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. End quote. Prayers and Meditations, Boswell's Life of Johnson, Volume 1, 483. End note. Of other parts of life, memory can give some account. At some hours I have been gay, and at others serious. I have sometimes mingled in conversation, and sometimes meditated in solitude. One day has been spent in consulting the ancient sages, and another in writing adventurers. At the conclusion of any undertaking, it is usual to compute the loss and profit. As I shall soon cease to write adventurers, I could not forbear lately to consider what has been the consequence of my labors, and whether I am to reckon the hours laid out in these compositions as applied to a good and laudable purpose, or suffered to fume away in useless evaporations. That I have intended well, I have the attestation of my own heart, but good intentions may be frustrated when they are executed without suitable skill, or directed to an end unattainable in itself. Some there are who leave writers very little room for self-congratulation. Some who affirm that books have no influence upon the public, that no age was ever made better by its authors, and that to call upon mankind to correct their manners is like Xerxes to scourge the wind or shackle the torrent. This opinion they pretend to support by unfailing experience. The world is full of fraud and corruption, rapine and malignity. Interest is the ruling motive of mankind, and everyone is endeavoring to increase his own stores of happiness by perpetual accumulations, without reflecting upon the numbers whom his superfluity condemns to want. In this state of things, a book or morality is published in which charity and benevolence are strongly enforced, and it is proved beyond opposition that men are happy in proportion as they are virtuous, and rich as they are liberal. The book is applauded, and the author is preferred. He imagines his applause deserved, and receives less pleasure from the acquisition of reward than the consciousness of merit. Let us look again upon mankind. Interest is still the ruling motive, and the world is yet full of fraud and corruption, malevolence and rapine. The difficulty of confuting this assertion arises merely from its generality and comprehension. To overthrow it by a detail of distinct facts requires a wider survey of the world than human eyes can take. The progress of reformation is gradual and silent, as the extension of evening shadows. We know that they were short at noon and are long at sunset, but our senses were not able to discern their increase. We know of every civil nation that it was once savage, and how was it reclaimed but by precept and admonition? Mankind are universally corrupt, but corrupt in different degrees, as they are universally ignorant, yet with greater or less irradiations of knowledge. How has knowledge or virtue been increased and preserved in one place beyond another, but by diligent inculcation and rational enforcement? Books of morality are daily written, yet its influence is still little in the world. So the ground is annually plowed, and yet multitudes are in want of bread. But surely neither the labors of the moralist nor of the husbandman are vain. Let them for a while neglect their tasks, and their usefulness will be known. The wickedness that is now frequent will become universal. The bread that is now scarce will wholly fail. The power, indeed, of every individual is small, and the consequence of his endeavors imperceptible in a general prospect of the world. Providence has given no man ability to do much, that something might be left for every man to do. The business of life is carried on by a general cooperation, in which the part of any single man can be no more distinguished than the effect of a particular drop when the meadows are floated by a summer shower. Yet every drop increases the inundation, and every hand adds to the happiness or misery of mankind. That a writer, however zealous or eloquent, seldom works a visible effect upon cities or nations will readily be granted. The book which is read most is read by few compared with those that read it not, and of those few the greater part peruse it with dispositions that very little favor their own improvement. It is difficult to enumerate the several motives which procure to books the honor of perusal: spite, vanity and curiosity, hope and fear, love and hatred. Every passion which incites to any other action serves at one time or other to stimulate a reader. Some are fond to take a celebrated volume into their hands because they hope to distinguish their penetration by finding faults which have escaped the public. Others eagerly buy it in the first bloom of reputation, that they may join the chorus of praise, and not lag, as Falstaff terms it, in the rearward of the fashion. Some read for style, and some for argument. One has little care about the sentiment; he observes only how it is expressed. Another regards not the conclusion, but is diligent to mark how it is inferred. They read for other purposes than the attainment of practical knowledge, and are no more likely to grow wise by an examination of a treatise of moral prudence than an architect to inflame his devotion by considering attentively the proportions of a temple. Some read that they may embellish their conversation or shine in dispute, some that they may not be detected in ignorance, or want the reputation of literary accomplishments. But the most general and prevalent reason of study is the impossibility of finding another amusement equally cheap or constant, equally independent on the hour or the weather. Note 23, Appendix. People in general do not willingly read if they can have anything else to amuse them. There must be an external impulse, emulation or vanity or avarice. The progress which the understanding makes through a book has more pain than pleasure in it. Language is scanty and inadequate to express the nice gradations and mixtures of our feelings. No man reads a book of science from pure inclination. Hills Boswell, Volume 4, 218. End note. He that wants money to follow the chase of pleasure through her yearly circuit, and is left at home when the gay world rolls to Bath or Tunbridge, he whose gout compels him to hear from his chamber the rattle of chariots transporting happier beings to plays or assemblies, will be forced to seek in books a refuge from himself. The author is not wholly useless who provides innocent amusements for minds like these. There are, in the present state of things, so many more instigations to evil than incitements to good, that he who keeps men in a neutral state may be justly considered as a benefactor to life. But perhaps it seldom happens that study terminates in mere pastime. Books have always a secret influence on the understanding. We cannot at pleasure obliterate ideas. He that reads books of science, though without any fixed desire of improvement, will grow more knowing. He that entertains himself with moral or religious treatises will imperceptibly advance in goodness. The ideas which are often offered to the mind will at last find a lucky moment when it is disposed to receive them. It is therefore urged without reason, as a discouragement to writers, that there are already books sufficient in the world, that all the topics of persuasion have been discussed, and every important question clearly stated and justly decided, and that therefore there is no room to hope that pygmies should conquer where heroes have been defeated, or that the petty copiers of the present time should advance the great work of reformation which their predecessors were forced to leave unfinished. Whatever be the present extent of human knowledge, it is not only finite, and therefore in its own nature capable of increase, but so narrow that almost every understanding may, by a diligent application of its powers, hope to enlarge it. It is, however, not necessary that a man should forbear to write till he has discovered some truth unknown before. He may be sufficiently useful by only diversifying the surface of knowledge, and luring the mind by a new appearance to a second view of those beauties which it had passed over inattentively before. Every writer may find intellects correspondent to his own, to whom his expressions are familiar and his thoughts congenial, and perhaps truth is often more successfully propagated by men of moderate abilities, who, adopting the opinions of others, have no care but to explain them clearly, than by subtle speculatists and curious searchers, who exact from their readers powers equal to their own, and if their fabrics of science be strong, take no care to make them accessible. For my part, I do not regret the hours which I have laid out in these little compositions. That the world has grown apparently better since the publication of The Adventurer, I have not observed, but am willing to think that many have been affected by single sentiments of which it is their business to renew the impression, that many have caught hints of truth which it is now their duty to pursue, and that those who have received no improvement have wanted not opportunity but intention to improve. End of chapter 49. Recording by Pamela Nagami.
Section 50 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 50. The Happiness and Vexation of Authors. Saturday, March 2nd, 1754. Quid pure tranquillit honos an dulce lucellam an secretum iter et falentis samita vitae. Horace. Whether the tranquil mind and pure honours, or wealth our bliss ensure, or down through life unknown to stray, where lonely leads the silent way. Francis. Having considered the importance of authors to the welfare of the public, I am led by a natural train of thought to reflect on their condition with regard to themselves, and to inquire what degree of happiness or vexation is annexed to the difficult and laborious employment of providing instruction or entertainment for mankind. In estimating the pain or pleasure of any particular state, every man indeed draws his decisions from his own breast, and cannot with certainty determine whether other minds are affected by the same causes in the same manner. Yet by this criterion we must be content to judge, because no other can be obtained. And, indeed, we have no reason to think it very fallacious, for excepting here and there an anomalous mind, which either does not feel like others, or dissembles its sensibility, we find men unanimously concur in attributing happiness or misery to particular conditions, as they agree in acknowledging the cold of winter and the heat of autumn. If we apply to authors themselves for an account of their state, it will appear very little to deserve envy, for they have in all ages been addicted to complaint. The neglect of learning, the ingratitude of the present age, and the absurd preference by which ignorance and dullness often obtain favour and rewards, have been from age to age topics of invective, and few have left their names to posterity without some appeal to future candour from the perverseness and malice of their own times. I have, nevertheless, been often inclined to doubt whether authors, however querulous, are in reality more miserable than their fellow mortals. The present life is to all a state of infelicity. Every man, like an author, believes himself to merit more than he obtains, and solaces the present with the prospect of the future. Others, indeed, suffer those disappointments in silence, of which the writer complains, to show how well he has learnt the art of lamentation. There is at least one gleam of felicity of which few writers have missed the enjoyment. He whose hopes have so far overpowered his fears, as that he has resolved to stand forth a candidate for fame, seldom fails to amuse himself, before his appearance, with pleasing scenes of affluence or honour. While his fortune is yet under the regulation of fancy, he easily models it to his wish, suffers no thoughts of critics or rivals to intrude upon his mind, but counts over the bounties of patronage, or listens to the voice of praise. Some there are that talk very luxuriously of the second period of an author's happiness, and tell of the tumultuous raptures of invention, when the mind riots in imagery, and the choice stands suspended between different sentiments. These pleasures, I believe, may sometimes be indulged to those who come to a subject of disquisition with minds full of ideas, and with fancies so vigorous as easily to excite, select, and arrange them. To write is indeed no unpleasing employment, when one sentiment readily produces another, and both ideas and expressions present themselves at the first summons. But such happiness the greatest genius does not always obtain, and common writers know it only to such a degree as to credit its possibility. Composition is, for the most part, an effort of slow diligence and steady perseverance, to which the mind is dragged by necessity or resolution, and from which the attention is every moment starting to more delightful amusements. It frequently happens that a design, which, when considered at a distance, gave flattering hopes of facility, mocks us in the execution with unexpected difficulties. The mind which, while it considered it in the gross, imagined itself amply furnished with materials, finds sometimes an unexpected barrenness and vacuity, and wonders whither all those ideas are vanished, which a little before seemed struggling for emission. Sometimes many thoughts present themselves, but so confused and unconnected, that they are not without difficulty reduced to method, or concatenated in a regular and dependent series. The mind falls at once into a labyrinth, of which neither the beginning nor end can be discovered, and toils and struggles without progress or extrication. It is asserted by Horace that, if matter be once got together, words will be found with very little difficulty, a position which, though sufficiently plausible to be inserted in poetical precepts, is by no means strictly and philosophically true. If words were naturally and necessarily consequential to sentiments, it would always follow that he who has most knowledge must have most eloquence, and that every man would clearly express what he fully understood. Yet we find that to think and discourse are often the qualities of different persons, and many books might surely be produced where just and noble sentiments are degraded and obscured by unsuitable diction. Words, therefore, as well as things, claim the care of an author. Indeed, of many authors, and those not useless or contemptible, words are almost the only care. Many make it their study not so much to strike out new sentiments, as to recommend those which are already known to more favourable notice by fairer decorations. But every man, whether he copies or invents, whether he delivers his own thoughts or those of another, has often found himself deficient in the power of expression, big with ideas which he could not utter, obliged to ransack his memory for terms adequate to his conceptions, and at last unable to impress upon his reader the image existing in his own mind. It is one of the common distresses of a writer to be within a word of a happy period, to want only a single epithet to give amplification its full force, to require only a correspondent term in order to finish a paragraph with elegance, and make one of its members answer to the other. But these deficiencies cannot always be supplied, and after a long study and vexation, the passage is turned anew, and the web unwoven that was so nearly finished. But when thoughts and words are collected and adjusted, and the whole composition at last concluded, it seldom gratifies the author when he comes coolly and deliberately to review it with the hopes which had been excited in the fury of the performance. Novelty always captivates the mind. As our thoughts rise fresh upon us, we readily believe them just and original, which, when the pleasure of production is over, we find to be mean and common, or borrowed from the works of others, and supplied by memory rather than invention. But though it should happen that the writer finds no such faults in his performance, he is still to remember that he looks upon it with partial eyes, and when he considers how much men who could judge of others with great exactness have often failed of judging of themselves, he will be afraid of deciding too hastily in his own favour, or of allowing himself to contemplate with too much complacence treasure that has not yet been brought to the test, nor passed the only trial that can stamp its value. From the public, and only from the public, is he to await a confirmation of his claim, and a final justification of self-esteem. But the public is not easily persuaded to favour an author. If mankind were left to judge for themselves, it is reasonable to imagine that of such writings at least as describe the movements of the human passions, and of which every man carries the archetype within him, a just opinion would be formed. But whoever has remarked the fate of books must have found it governed by other causes than general consent arising from general conviction. If a new performance happens not to fall into the hands of some who have the courage to tell, and authority to propagate their opinion, it often remains long in obscurity, and perishes unknown and unexamined. A few, a very few, commonly constitute the taste of the time. The judgment which they had once pronounced, some are too lazy to discuss, and some too timorous to contradict. It may, however, be, I think, observed, that their power is greater to depress than exalt, as mankind are more credulous of censure than of praise. This perversion of the public judgment is not to be rashly numbered amongst the miseries of an author, since it commonly serves, after miscarriage, to reconcile him to himself. Because the world has sometimes passed an unjust sentence, he readily concludes the sentence unjust by which his performance is condemned. Because some have been exalted above their merits by partiality, he is sure to ascribe the success of a rival not to the merit of his work, but the zeal of his patrons. Upon the whole, as the author seems to share all the common miseries of life, he appears to partake likewise of its lenitives and abatements. End of section 50.
Section number 51 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Langford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 51, The Idler's Character. Dr. Johnson began The Idler on the 15th of April, 1758, in a Saturday newspaper called the Universal Chronicle, or Weekly Gazette. The last number appeared on the 5th of April, 1760. Out of the 103 essays of which The Idler consists, Johnson wrote all but 12. Boswell remarks that The Idler is evidently the work of the same mind which produced The Rambler, but has less body and more spirit. Johnson describes the miseries of idleness with the lively sensations of one who has felt them, and in his private memorandums while engaged in it, we find, "This year I hope to learn diligence." Many of these excellent essays were written as hastily as an ordinary letter. Mr. Langton remembers Johnson, when on a visit at Oxford, asking him one evening when the post went out, and on being told in about half an hour, he exclaimed, "Then we shall do very well." He upon this instantly sat down and finished An Idler, which it was necessary should be in London the next day. Boswell's Life of Johnson, Volume 1, 330. The Idlers were inserted in the Universal Chronicle on the plea that the occurrences of the week were not sufficient to fill the columns, but they at once became its chief attraction, and Johnson had in January 1759 to prepare an advertisement warning the publishers of other papers who had, with so little regard to justice or decency, reprinted them into their own columns without permission or acknowledgment, that the time of impunity was at an end. Whoever, he said, shall without our leave lay the hand of rapine upon our pages, is to expect that we shall vindicate our due by the means which justice prescribes, and which are warranted by the immemorial prescriptions of honorable trade. English Newspapers, Chapters in the History of Journalism, by H. R. Fox Bourne, Volume 1, page 144. Saturday, April 15th, 1758. Vacui sub umbra lucimus. Horace. Those who attempt periodical essays seem to be often stopped in the beginning by the difficulty of finding a proper title. Two writers since the time of the Spectator have assumed his name without any pretensions to lawful inheritance. An effort was once made to revive the Tatler, and the strange appellations by which other papers have been called show that the authors were distressed like the natives of America, who come to the Europeans to beg a name. It will be easily believed of the Idler that if his title had required any search, he never would have found it. Every mode of life has its conveniencies. The Idler, who habituates himself to be satisfied with what he can most easily obtain, not only escapes labors which are often fruitless, but sometimes succeeds better than those who despise all that is within their reach, and think everything more valuable as it is harder to be acquired. If similitude of manners be a motive to kindness, the Idler may flatter himself with universal patronage. There is no single character under which such numbers are comprised. Every man is, or hopes to be, an Idler. Even those who seem to differ most from us are hastening to increase our fraternity. As peace is the end of war, so to be idle is the ultimate purpose of the busy. There is perhaps no appellation by which a writer can better denote his kindred to the human species. It has been found hard to describe man by an adequate definition. Some philosophers have called him a reasonable animal, but others have considered reason as a quality of which many creatures partake. He has been termed likewise a laughing animal, but it is said that some men have never laughed. Perhaps man may be more properly distinguished as an idle animal, for there is no man who is not sometimes idle. It is at least a definition from which none that shall find it in this paper can be accepted, for who can be more idle than the reader of the Idler? That the definition may be complete, idleness must be not only the general but the peculiar characteristic of man, and perhaps man is the only being that can properly be called idle that does by others what he might do himself, or sacrifices duty or pleasure to the love of ease. Scarcely any name can be imagined from which less envy or competition is to be dreaded. The Idler has no rivals or enemies. That man of business forgets him, the man of enterprise despises him, and though such as tread the same track of life fall commonly into jealousy and discord, Idlers are almost always found to associate in peace, and he who is most famed for doing nothing is glad to meet another as idle as himself. What is to be expected from this paper, whether it will be uniform or various, learned or familiar, serious or gay, political or moral, continued or interrupted, it is hoped that no reader will inquire. That the Idler has some scheme cannot be doubted, for to form schemes is the Idler's privilege. But though he has many projects in his head, he is now grown sparing of communication, having observed that his hearers are apt to remember what he forgets himself, that his tardiness of execution exposes him to the encroachments of those who catch a hint and fall to work, and that very specious plans after long contrivance and pompous displays have subsided in weariness without a trial, and without miscarriage have been blasted by derision. Something the idler's character may be supposed to promise. Those that are curious after diminutive history, who watch the revolutions of families and the rise and fall of characters, either male or female, will hope to be gratified by this paper. For the idler is always inquisitive and seldom retentive. He that delights in obloquy and satire, and wishes to see clouds gathering over any reputation that dazzles him with its brightness, will snatch up the idler's essays with a beating heart. The idler is naturally censorious. Those who attempt nothing themselves think everything easily performed, and consider the unsuccessful always as criminals. I think it necessary to give notice that I make no contract nor incur any obligation. If those who depend on the idler for intelligence and entertainment should suffer the disappointment which commonly follows ill-placed expectations, they are to lay the blame only to themselves. Yet hope is not wholly to be cast away. The idler, though sluggish, is yet alive, and may sometimes be stimulated to vigor and activity. He may descend into profoundness, or tower into sublimity, for the diligence of an idler is rapid and impetuous, as ponderous bodies forced into velocity move with violence proportionate to their weight. But these vehement exertions of intellect cannot be frequent, and he will therefore gladly receive help from any correspondent who shall enable him to please without his own labor. He excludes no style, he prohibits no subject. Only let him that writes to the idler remember that his letters must not be long. No words are to be squandered in declarations of esteem or confessions of inability. Conscious dullness has little right to be prolix, and praise is not so welcome to the idler as quiet. End of section 51. Recording by Anders Lankford. Section 52 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Lankford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 52. Invitation to Correspondence. Saturday, April 22nd, 1758. Toto vix quater anno membranum. Horace. Many positions are often on the tongue and seldom in the mind. There are many truths which every human being acknowledges and forgets. It is generally known that he who expects much will be often disappointed, yet disappointment seldom cures us of expectation, or has any other effect than that of producing a moral sentence or peevish exclamation. He that embarks in the voyage of life will always wish to advance rather by the impulse of the wind than the strokes of the oar, and many founder in the passage, while they lie waiting for the gale that is to waft them to their wish. It will naturally be suspected that the idler has lately suffered some disappointment, and that he does not talk thus gravely for nothing. No man is required to betray his own secrets. I will, however, confess that I have now been a writer almost a week, and have not yet heard a single word of praise, nor received one hint from any correspondent. Whence this negligence proceeds, I am not able to discover. Many of my predecessors have thought themselves obliged to return their acknowledgments in the second paper, for the kind reception of the first, and in a short time apologies have become necessary to those ingenious gentlemen and ladies whose performances, though in the highest degree elegant and learned, have been unavoidably delayed. What then will be thought of me, who, having experienced no kindness, have no thanks to return, whom no gentleman or lady has yet enabled to give any cause of discontent, and who have therefore no opportunity of showing how skilfully I can pacify resentment, extenuate negligence, or palliate rejection? I have long known that splendor of reputation is not to be counted among the necessaries of life, and therefore shall not much repine if praise be withheld till it is better deserved. But surely I may be allowed to complain that in a nation of authors not one has thought me worthy of notice after so fair an invitation. At the time when the rage of writing has seized the old and young, when the cook warbles her lyrics in the kitchen, and the thrasher vociferates his heroics in the barn, when our traders deal out knowledge in bulky volumes, and our girls forsake their samplers to teach kingdoms wisdom, it may seem very unnecessary to draw any more from their proper occupations by affording new opportunities of literary fame. I should be indeed unwilling to find that, for the sake of corresponding with the idler, the smith's iron had cooled on the anvil, or the spinster's distaff stood unemployed. I solicit only the contributions of those who have already devoted themselves to literature, or without any determinate intention wander at large through the expanse of life, and wear out the day in hearing at one place what they utter at another. Of these, a great part are already writers. One has a friend in the country upon whom he exercises his powers, whose passions he raises and depresses, whose understanding he perplexes with paradoxes or strengthens by argument, whose admiration he courts, whose praises he enjoys, and who serves him instead of a senate or a theatre. As the young soldiers in the Roman camp learned the use of their weapons by fencing against a post in the place of an enemy. Another has his pockets filled with essays and epigrams, which he reads from house to house to select parties, and which his acquaintances are daily entreating him to withhold no longer from the impatience of the public. If among these any one is persuaded that by such preludes of compositions he has qualified himself to appear in the open world, and is yet afraid of those censures which they who have already written, and they who cannot write, are equally ready to fulminate against public pretenders to fame, he may, by transmitting his performances to the idler, make a cheap experiment of his abilities, and enjoy the pleasure of success without the hazard of miscarriage. Many advantages not generally known arise from this method of stealing on the public. The standing author of the paper is always the object of critical malignity. Whatever is mean will be imputed to him, and whatever is excellent be ascribed to his assistants. It does not much alter the event that the author and his correspondents are equally unknown. For the author, whoever he be, is an individual of whom every reader has some fixed idea, and whom he is therefore unwilling to gratify with applause. But the praises given to his correspondents are scattered in the air. None can tell on whom they will light, and therefore none are unwilling to bestow them. He that is known to contribute to a periodical work needs no other caution than not to tell what particular pieces are his own. Such secrecy is indeed very difficult, but if it can be maintained, it is scarcely to be imagined at how small an expense he may grow considerable. A person of quality, by a single paper, may engross the honor of a volume. Fame is indeed dealt with a hand less and less bounteous through the subordinate ranks, till it descends to the professed author, who will find it very difficult to get more than he deserves. But every man who does not want it, or who needs not value it, may have liberaler allowances, and for 5 letters in the year sent to the idler, of which perhaps only 2 are printed, will be promoted to the first rank of writers by those who are weary of the present race of wits, and wish to sink them into obscurity before the lustre of a name not yet known enough to be detested. End of section 52. Recording by Anders Langford. Section 53 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Langford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 53, Robbery of Time. Saturday, July 15th, 1758. When Diogenes received a visit in his tub from Alexander the Great, and was asked, according to the ancient forms of royal courtesy, what petition he had to offer, "I have nothing," said he, "to ask, but that you would remove to the other side, that you may not, by intercepting the sunshine, take from me what you cannot give me." Such was the demand of Diogenes from the greatest monarch of the earth, which those who have less power than Alexander may with yet more propriety apply to themselves. He that does much good may be allowed to do sometimes a little harm, but if the opportunities of beneficence be denied by fortune, innocence should at least be vigilantly preserved. It is well known that time once past never returns, and that the moment which is lost for ever. Time, therefore, ought, above all other kinds of property, to be free from invasion. And yet there is no man who does not claim the power of wasting that time, which is the right of others. This usurpation is so general that a very small part of the year is spent by choice. Scarcely anything is done when it is intended, or obtained when it is desired. Life is continually ravaged by invaders. One steals away an hour and another a day. One conceals the robbery by hurrying us into business, another by lulling us with amusement. The depredation is continued through 1,000 vicissitudes of tumult and tranquillity, till, having lost all, we can lose no more. This waste of the lives of men has been very frequently charged upon the great, whose followers linger from year to year in expectations, and die at last with petitions in their hands. Those who raise envy will easily incur censure. I know not whether statesmen and patrons do not suffer more reproaches than they deserve, and may not rather themselves complain that they are given up a prey to pretensions without merit, and to importunity without shame. The truth is that the inconveniences of attendance are more lamented than felt. To the greater number solicitation is its own reward, to be seen in good company, to talk of familiarities with men of power, to be able to tell the freshest news, to gratify an inferior circle with predictions of increase or decline of favor, and to be regarded as a candidate for high offices, are compensations, more than equivalent to the delay of favors, which perhaps he that begs them has hardly confidence to expect. A man conspicuous in a high station, who multiplies hopes that he may multiply dependence, may be considered as a beast of prey, justly dreaded but easily avoided. His den is known, and they who would not be devoured need not approach it. The great danger of the waste of time is from caterpillars and moths, who are not resisted, because they are not feared, and who work on with unheeded mischiefs and invisible encroachments. He whose rank or merit procures him the notice of mankind must give up himself in a great measure to the convenience or humor of those who surround him. Every man who is sick of himself will fly to him for relief. He that wants to speak will require him to hear, and he that wants to hear will expect him to speak. Hour passes after hour, the noon succeeds to morning, and the evening to noon, while 1,000 objects are forced upon his attention which he rejects as fast as they are offered, but which the custom of the world requires to be received with appearance of regard. If we will have the kindness of others, we must endure their follies. He who cannot persuade himself to withdraw from society must be content to pay a tribute of his time to a multitude of tyrants. To the loiterer, who makes appointments which he never keeps, to the consulter, who asks advice which he never takes, to the boaster, who blusters only to be praised, to the complainer, who whines only to be pitied, to the projector, whose happiness is to entertain his friends with expectations which all but himself know to be vain, to the economist, who tells of bargains and settlements, to the politician, who predicts the fate of battles and breach of alliances, to the usurer, who compares the different funds, and to the talker, who talks only because he loves to be talking. To put every man in possession of his own time, and rescue the day from this succession of usurpers, is beyond my power. and beyond my hope. Yet perhaps some stop might be put to this unmerciful persecution, if all would seriously reflect that whoever pays a visit that is not desired, or talks longer than the hearer is willing to attend, is guilty of an injury which he cannot repair, and takes away that which he cannot give. End of section 53. Recording by Anders Lankford.
Section 54 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 54, Uncertainty of Friendship. The Idler, Saturday, September 23rd, 1758. Life has no pleasure higher or nobler than that of friendship. It is painful to consider that this sublime enjoyment may be impaired or destroyed by innumerable causes, and that there is no human possession of which the duration is less certain. Many have talked, in very exalted language, of the perpetuity of friendship, of invincible constancy, and unalienable kindness, and some examples have been seen of men who have continued faithful to their earliest choice, and whose affection has predominated over changes of fortune and contrariety of opinion. But these instances are memorable because they are rare. The friendship which is to be practised or expected by common mortals must take its rise from mutual pleasure, and must end when the power ceases of delighting each other. Many accidents, therefore, may happen, by which the ardor of kindness will be abated without criminal baseness or contemptible inconstancy on either part. To give pleasure is not always in our power, and little does he know himself who believes that he can be always able to receive it. Those who would gladly pass their days together may be separated by the different course of their affairs, and friendship, like love, is destroyed by long absence, though it may be increased by short intermissions. What we have missed long enough to want it, we value more when it is regained, but that which has been lost till it is forgotten will be found at last with little gladness, and with still less if a substitute has supplied the place. A man deprived of the companion to whom he used to open his bosom, and with whom he shared the hours of leisure and merriment, feels the day at first hanging heavy on him. His difficulties oppress and his doubts distract him. He sees time come and go without his wonted gratification, and all is sadness within, and solitude about him. But this uneasiness never lasts long. Necessity produces expedients, new amusements are discovered, and new conversation is admitted. No expectation is more frequently disappointed than that which naturally arises in the mind from the prospect of meeting an old friend after long separation. We expect the attraction to be revived, and the coalition to be renewed. No man considers how much alteration time has made in himself, and very few inquire what effect it has had upon others. The first hour convinces them that the pleasure which they had formerly enjoyed is for ever at an end. Different scenes have made different impressions, the opinions of both are changed, and that similitude of manners and sentiment is lost, which confirm them both in the approbation of themselves. Friendship is often destroyed by opposition of interest, not only by the ponderous and visible interest which the desire of wealth and greatness forms and maintains, but by 1,000 secret and slight competitions, scarcely known to the mind upon which they operate. There is scarce any man without some favorite trifle which he values above greater attainments, some desire of petty praise which he cannot patiently suffer to be frustrated. This minute ambition is sometimes crossed before it is known, and sometimes defeated by wanton petulance. But such attacks are seldom made without the loss of friendship. For whoever has once found the vulnerable part will always be feared, and the resentment will burn on in secret, of which shame hinders the discovery. This, however, is a slow malignity, which a wise man will obviate as inconsistent with quiet, and a good man will repress as contrary to virtue. But human happiness is sometimes violated by some more sudden strokes. A dispute begun in jest upon a subject which a moment before was on both parts regarded with careless indifference is continued by the desire of conquest till vanity kindles into rage and opposition rankles into enmity. Against this hasty mischief I know not what security can be obtained. Men will be sometimes surprised into quarrels, and though they might both hasten to reconciliation, as soon as their tumult has subsided, yet two minds will seldom be found together, which can at once subdue their discontent, or immediately enjoy the sweets of peace, without remembering the wounds of the conflict. Friendship has other enemies. Suspicion is always hardening the cautious, and disgust repelling the delicate. Very slender differences will sometimes part those whom long reciprocation of civility or beneficence has united. Lone Love and Ranger retired into the country to enjoy the company of each other, and returned in 6 weeks cold and petulant. Ranger's pleasure was to walk in the fields, and Lone Love's to sit in a bower. Each had complied with the other in his turn, and each was angry that compliance had been exacted. The most fatal disease of friendship is gradual decay, or dislike hourly increased by causes too slender for complaint, and too numerous for removal. Those who are angry may be reconciled. Those who have been injured may receive a recompense. But when the desire of pleasing and willingness to be pleased is silently diminished, the renovation of friendship is hopeless. As when the vital powers sink into languor, there is no longer any use of the physician. End of section 54. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Section 55 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 55. Corruptions of News Writers. The Idler, Saturday, November 11th, 1758. The desires of man increase with his acquisitions. Every step which he advances brings something within his view which he did not see before, and which, as soon as he sees it, he begins to want. Where necessity ends, curiosity begins, and no sooner are we supplied with everything that nature can demand than we sit down to contrive artificial appetites. By this restlessness of mind, every populous and wealthy city is filled with innumerable employments for which the greater part of mankind is without a name, with artificers whose labor is exerted in producing such petty conveniences that many shops are furnished with instruments of which the use can hardly be found without inquiry, but which he that once knows them quickly learns to number among necessary things. Such is the diligence with which, in countries completely civilized, one part of mankind labors for another, that wants are supplied faster than they can be formed, and the idle and luxurious find life stagnant for want of some desire to keep it in motion. This species of distress furnishes a new set of occupations, and multitudes are busied from day to day in finding the rich and the fortunate something to do. It is very common to reproach those artists as useless who produce only such superfluities as neither accommodate the body nor improve the mind, and of which no other effect can be imagined than that they are the occasions of spending money and consuming time. But this censure will be mitigated when it is seriously considered that money and time are the heaviest burdens of life, and that the unhappiest of all mortals are those who have more of either than they know how to use. To set himself free from these encumbrances, one hurries to Newmarket, another travels over Europe, one pulls down his house and calls architects about him, another buys a seat in the country and follows his hounds over hedges and through rivers, one makes collections of shells, and another searches the world for tulips and carnations. He is surely a public benefactor who finds employment for those to whom it is thus difficult to find it for themselves. It is true that this is seldom done merely from generosity or compassion. Almost every man seeks his own advantage in helping others, and therefore it is too common for mercenary officiousness to consider rather what is grateful than what is right. We all know that it is more profitable to be loved than esteemed, and ministers of pleasure will always be found who study to make themselves necessary and to supplant those who are practicing the same arts. One of the amusements of idleness is reading without the fatigue of close attention, and the world therefore swarms with writers whose wish is not to be studied but to be read. No species of literary men has lately been so much multiplied as the writers of news. Not many years ago the nation was content with one gazette, but now we have not only in the metropolis papers for every morning and every evening, but almost every large town has its weekly historian, who regularly circulates his periodical intelligence and fills the villages of his district with conjectures on the events of war and with debates on the true interest of Europe. To write news in its perfection requires such a combination of qualities that a man completely fitted for the task is not always to be found. In Sir Henry Wotton's jocular definition, quote, an ambassador is said to be a man of virtue sent abroad to tell lies for the advantage of his country. A news writer is a man without virtue who writes lies at home for his own profit, end quote. To these compositions is required neither genius nor knowledge, neither industry nor sprightliness, but contempt of shame and indifference to truth are absolutely necessary. He who by a long familiarity with infamy has obtained these qualities may confidently tell today what he intends to contradict tomorrow. He may affirm fearlessly what he knows that he shall be obliged to recant, and may write letters from Amsterdam or Dresden to himself. In a time of war, the nation is always of one mind, eager to hear something good of themselves and ill of the enemy. At this time, the task of news writers is easy. They have nothing to do but to tell that a battle is expected, and afterwards that a battle has been fought, in which we and our friends, whether conquering or conquered, did all, and our enemies did nothing. Scarcely anything awakens attention like a tale of cruelty. The writer of news never fails in the intermission of action to tell how the enemies murdered children and ravished virgins, and if the scene of action be somewhat distant, scalps half the inhabitants of a province. Among the calamities of war may be justly numbered the diminution of the love of truth by the falsehoods which interest dictates and credulity encourages. A peace will equally leave the warrior and relater of wars destitute of employment, and I know not whether more is to be dreaded from the streets filled with soldiers accustomed to plunder, or from garrets filled with scribblers accustomed to lie. Endnote 26. 26 years after Johnson wrote this philippic, we find from the following conversation that his prejudice was still as deeply rooted. Quote, the celebrated Mrs. Rudd being mentioned, Johnson, quote, 15 years ago I should have gone to see her. Spotswood, because she was 15 years younger? No, sir, But now they have a trick of putting everything into the newspapers." End quote. Boswell, Volume 3, page 333. End note. End of section 55. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Section 56 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 56. Disguises of Idleness. Sober's Character. The Idler. Saturday, November 18th, 1758. Many moralists have remarked that pride has of all human vices the widest dominion, appears in the greatest multiplicity of forms, and lies hid under the greatest variety of disguises which, like the moon's veil of brightness, are both its lustre and its shade, and betray it to others, though they hide it from ourselves. It is not my intention to degrade pride from this preeminence of mischief, yet I know not whether idleness may not maintain a very doubtful and obstinate competition. There are some that profess idleness in its full dignity, who call themselves the idle, as Busiris in the play calls himself the proud, who boast that they do nothing, and thank their stars that they have nothing to do, who sleep every night till they can sleep no more, and rise only that exercise may enable them to sleep again, who prolong the reign of darkness by double curtains, and never see the sun but to tell him how they hate his beams, whose whole labor is to vary the posture of indolence, and whose day differs from their night but as a couch or chair differs from a bed. These are the true and open votaries of idleness, for whom she weaves the garlands of poppies, and into whose cup she pours the waters of oblivion, who exist in a state of unruffled stupidity, forgetting and forgotten, who have long ceased to live, and at whose death the survivors can only say that they have ceased to breathe. But idleness predominates in many lives where it is not suspected, for being a vice which terminates in itself, it may be enjoyed without injury to others, and it is therefore not watched like fraud, which endangers property, or like pride, which naturally seeks its gratification in another's inferiority. Idleness is a silent and peaceful quality that neither raises envy by ostentation nor hatred by opposition, and therefore nobody is busy to censure or detect it. As pride sometimes is hid under humility, idleness is often covered by turbulence and hurry. He that neglects his known duty and real employment naturally endeavors to crowd his mind with something that may bar out the remembrance of his own folly, and does anything but what he ought to do with eager diligence, that he may keep himself in his own favor. Some are always in a state of preparation, occupied in previous measures, forming plans, accumulating materials, and providing for the main affair. These are certainly under the secret power of idleness. Nothing is to be expected from the workman whose tools are forever to be sought. I was once told by a great master that no man ever excelled in painting who was eminently curious about pencils and colors. There are others to whom idleness dictates another expedient by which life may be passed unprofitably away without the tediousness of many vacant hours. The art is to fill the day with petty business, to have always something in hand which may raise curiosity but not solicitude, and keep the mind in a state of action but not of labor. This art has for many years been practiced by my old friend Sober with wonderful success. End note 27. The greatest living authority on the life and times of Johnson, his 19th century Boswell in fact, Dr. Birkbeck Hill, thinks that in Mr. Sober we have a portrait of the doctor drawn by his own hand. There is unquestionably much in the sketch to warrant such a conclusion. Endnote. Sober is a man of strong desires and quick imagination, so exactly balanced by the love of ease that they can seldom stimulate him to any difficult undertaking. They have, however, so much power that they will not suffer him to lie quite at rest, and though they do not make him sufficiently useful to others, they make him at least weary of himself. Mr. Sober's chief pleasure is conversation. There is no end to his talk or his attention. To speak or to hear is equally pleasing, for he still fancies that he is teaching or learning something, and is free for the time from his own reproaches. But there is one time at night when he must go home that his friends may sleep, and another time in the morning when all the world agrees to shut out interruption. Endnote 28. Dr. Johnson's repugnance to early rising is well known. He struggled manfully but unsuccessfully against what was in reality a constitutional infirmity. When at the height of his fame, the Sultan of English literature was a man who was known to be never ready to go to bed, and once there, never ready to get out. Endnote. These are the moments of which poor Sober trembles at the thought, but the misery of these tiresome intervals he has many means of alleviating. He has persuaded himself that the manual arts are undeservedly overlooked. He has observed in many trades the effects of close thought and just ratiocination. From speculation he proceeded to practice and supply himself with the tools of a carpenter, with which he mended his coal box very successfully, in which he still continues to employ as he finds occasion. He has attempted at other times the crafts of shoemaker, tinman, plumber, and potter. In all these arts he has failed, and resolves to qualify himself for them by better information. But his daily amusement is chemistry. He has a small furnace which he employs in distillation, and which has long been the solace of his life. He draws oils and waters and essences and spirits which he knows to be of no use, sits and counts the drops as they come from his retort, and forgets that whilst a drop is falling, a moment flies away. Poor Sober! I have often teased him with reproof, and he has often promised reformation. For no man is so much open to conviction as the idler, but there is none on whom it operates so little. What will be the effect of this paper I know not. Perhaps he will read it and laugh, and light the fire in his furnace, but my hope is that he will quit his trifles and betake himself to rational and useful diligence. End of section 56. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Section 57 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 57. The Terrifick Diction. The Idler. Saturday, December 23rd, 1758. The great differences that disturb the peace of mankind are not about ends, but means. We have all the same general desires, but how those desires shall be accomplished will forever be disputed. The ultimate purpose of government is temporal, and that of religion is eternal happiness. Hitherto we agree, but here we must part, to try, according to the endless varieties of passion and understanding combined with one another, every possible form of government and every imaginable tenet of religion. We are told by Cumberland that rectitude, applied to action or contemplation, is merely metaphorical, and that as a right line describes the shortest passage from point to point, so a right action effects a good design by the fewest means, and so likewise a right opinion is that which connects distant truths by the shortest train of intermediate propositions. To find the nearest way from truth to truth, or from purpose to effect, not to use more instruments where fewer will be sufficient, not to move by wheels and levers what will give way to the naked hand, is the great proof of a healthful and vigorous mind, neither feeble with helpless ignorance, nor overburdened with unwieldy knowledge. But there are men who seem to think nothing so much the characteristic of a genius as to do common things in an uncommon manner, like Hudibras, to tell the clock by algebra, or like the lady in Dr. Young's satires, to drink tea by stratagem, to quit the beaten track only because it is known, and take a new path, however crooked or rough, because the straight was found out before. Every man speaks and writes with intent to be understood, and it can seldom happen but he that understands himself might convey his notions to another, if, content to be understood, he did not seek to be admired. But when once he begins to contrive how his sentiments may be received, not with most ease to his reader, but with most advantage to himself, he then transfers his consideration from words to sounds, from sentences to periods, and as he grows more elegant, becomes less intelligible. It is difficult to enumerate every species of authors whose labors counteract themselves. The man of exuberance and copiousness, who diffuses every thought through so many diversities of expression that it is lost like water in a mist, the ponderous dictator of sentences, whose notions are delivered in the lump, and are, like uncoined bullion, of more weight than use, the liberal illustrator, who shows by examples and comparisons what was clearly seen when it was first proposed, and the stately son of demonstration, who proves with mathematical formality what no man has yet pretended to doubt. There is a mode of style for which I know not that the masters of oratory have yet found a name, a style by which the most evident truths are so obscured that they can no longer be perceived, and the most familiar propositions so disguised that they cannot be known. Every other kind of eloquence is the dress of sense, but this is the mask by which a true master of his art will effectually conceal it, that a man will as easily mistake his own positions if he meets them thus transformed, as he may pass in a masquerade his nearest acquaintance. This style may be called the terrific, for its chief intention is to terrify and amaze. Endnote 29. Dr. Johnson unconsciously describes himself in a phrase which occurs in this essay, quote, "the ponderous dictator of sentences, whose notions are delivered in the lump, and are like an uncoined bullion of more weight than use." End quote. The racy vigor and brilliant incisiveness of his reported talk heightens the contrast which exists between it and the terrific diction which marks his published works. Johnson often played the part of candid friend to Oliver Goldsmith, and sometimes the light-hearted poet ventured to pay back in his own coin, as the following incident shows. Quote, "Goldsmith was often very fortunate in his witty contests, even when he entered the lists with Johnson himself. Sir Joshua Reynolds was in company with them one day, when Goldsmith said that he thought he could write a good fable, mentioned the simplicity which that kind of composition requires, and observed that in most fables the animals introduced seldom talk in character. For instance, said he, the fable of the little fishes who saw birds fly over their heads, and envying them petitioned Jupiter to be changed into birds. The skill, he continued, consists in making them talk like little fishes. While he indulged himself in this fanciful review, he observed Johnson shaking his sides and laughing, upon which he smartly proceeded, "Why, Dr. Johnson, this is not so easy as you seem to think, for if you were to make little fishes talk, they would talk like whales." End quote. Boswell, Volume 2, page 231. End note. It may be termed the repulsive, for its natural effect is to drive away the reader, or it may be distinguished in plain English by the denomination of the bugbear style, for it has more terror than danger, and will appear less formidable as it is more nearly approached. A mother tells her infant that 2 and 2 make 4. The child remembers the proposition and is able to count 4 to all the purpose of life, till the course of his education brings him among philosophers who fright him from his former knowledge by telling him that 4 is a certain aggregate of units, that all numbers being only the repetition of an unit, which, though not a number itself, is the parent, root, or original of all number. 4 is the denomination assigned to a certain number of such repetitions. The only danger is lest, when he first hears these dreadful sounds, the pupil should run away, if he has but the courage to stay till the conclusion, he will find that when speculation has done its worst, 2 and 2 still make 4. An illustrious example of this species of eloquence may be found in Letters Concerning Mind, footnote, by John Petvin, published in London in 1750. The author begins by declaring that the sorts of things are things that now are, have been, and shall be, and the things that strictly are. In this position, except the last clause, in which he uses something of the scholastic language, there is nothing but what every man has heard and imagines himself to know. But who would not believe that some wonderful novelty is presented to his intellect, when he is afterwards told, in the true bugbear style, that the R's in the former sense are things that lie between the have-beens and the shall-be's? The have-beens are things that are past, the shall-be's are things that are to come, and the things that are, in the latter sense, are things that have not been, nor shall be, nor stand in the midst of such as are before them or shall be after them. The things that have been and shall be have respect to present, past, and future. Those likewise that now are have moreover place, that, for instance, which is here, that which is to the east, that which is to the west. All this, my dear reader, is very strange, but though it be strange, it is not new. Survey these wonderful sentences again, and they will be found to contain nothing more than very plain truths, which, till this author arose, had always been delivered in plain language. End of Section 57. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Section 58 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 58, on the Death of a Friend. The Idler, Saturday, January 27th, 1759. The following letter relates to an affliction perhaps not necessary to be imparted to the public, but I could not persuade myself to suppress it, because I think I know the sentiments to be sincere, and I feel no disposition to provide for this day any other entertainment. Mr. Idler, notwithstanding the warnings of philosophers and the daily examples of losses and misfortunes which life forces upon our observation, such is the absorption of our thoughts in the business of the present day, such the resignation of our reason to empty hopes of future felicity, or such our unwillingness to foresee what we dread, that every calamity comes suddenly upon us, and not only presses us as a burthen, but crushes us as a blow. There are evils which happen out of the common course of nature, against which it is no reproach not to be provided. A flash of lightning intercepts the traveller in his way. The concussion of an earthquake heaps the ruins of cities upon their inhabitants. But other miseries time brings, though silently yet visibly forward by its even lapse, which yet approach us unseen, because we turn our eyes away, and seize us unresisted, because we could not arm ourselves against them but by setting them before us. That it is vain to shrink from what cannot be avoided, and to hide that from ourselves which must sometime be found, is a truth which we all know, but which all neglect, and perhaps none more than the speculative reasoner, whose thoughts are always from home, whose eye wanders over life, whose fancy dances over meteors of happiness kindled by itself, and who examines everything rather than his own state. Nothing is more evident than that the decays of age must terminate in death. Yet there is no man, says Tully, who does not believe that he may yet live another year, and there is none who does not, upon the same principle, hope another year for his parent or his friend. But the fallacy will be in time detected. The last year, the last day, must come. Endnote 30. A pathetic interest attaches to this number of the Idler. It was written 2 or 3 days after the death at Lichfield of Dr. Johnson's mother, at the advanced age of 90, an event which, according to Boswell, deeply affected him, since his reverential affection for her was not abated by years, as indeed he retained all his tender feelings even to the latest period of his life. Endnote. It has come and is past. The life which made my own life pleasant is at an end, and the gates of death are shut upon my prospects. The loss of a friend upon whom the heart was fixed, to whom every wish and endeavour tended, is a state of dreary desolation, in which the mind looks abroad impatient of itself, and finds nothing but emptiness and horror. The blameless life, the artless tenderness, the pious simplicity, the modest resignation, the patient sickness, and the quiet death are remembered only to add value to the loss, to aggravate regret for what cannot be amended, to deepen sorrow for what cannot be recalled. These are the calamities by which Providence gradually disengages us from the love of life. Other evils fortitude may repel, or hope may mitigate, but irreparable privation leaves nothing to exercise resolution or flatter expectation. The dead cannot return, and nothing is left us here but languishment and grief. Yet such is the course of nature, that whoever lives long must outlive those whom he loves and honours. Such is the condition of our present existence, that life must one time lose its associations, and every inhabitant of the earth must walk downward to the grave alone and unregarded, without any partner of his joy or grief, without any interested witness of his misfortunes or success. Misfortune indeed he may yet feel, for where is the bottom of the misery of man? But what is success to him that has none to enjoy it? Happiness is not found in self-contemplation. It is perceived only when it is reflected from another. We know little of the state of departed souls, because such knowledge is not necessary to a good life. Reason deserts us at the brink of the grave, and can give no further intelligence. Revelation is not wholly silent. There is joy in the angels of heaven over one sinner that repenteth, and surely this joy is not incommunicable to souls disentangled from the body and made like angels. Let hope therefore dictate what revelation does not confute, that the union of souls may still remain, and that we who are struggling with sin, sorrow, and infirmities may have our part in the attention and kindness of those who have finished their course and are now receiving their reward. These are the great occasions which force the mind to take refuge in religion. When we have no help in ourselves, what can remain but that we look up to a higher and a greater power? And to what hope may we not raise our eyes and hearts when we consider that the greatest power is the best? Surely there is no man who, thus afflicted, does not seek succor in the gospel, which has brought life and immortality to light. The precepts of Epicurus, who teaches us to endure what the laws of the universe make necessary, may silence but not content us. The dictates of Zeno, who commands us to look with indifference on external things, may dispose us to conceal our sorrow, but cannot assuage it. Real alleviation of the loss of friends and rational tranquillity in the prospect of our own dissolution can be received only from the promises of Him in whose hands are life and death, and from the assurance of another and better state, in which all tears will be wiped from the eyes, and the whole soul shall be filled with joy. Philosophy may infuse stubbornness, but religion only can give patience. I am, and etc. Footnote. This paper was written by Dr. Johnson on the death of his mother. He wrote Rasselas in order to defray the expenses of her funeral and to pay a few small debts she had left. End of section 58. Recording by Pamela Nagami.
Section 59 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 59. Monitions on the Flight of Time. Saturday, February the 10th, 1759. The natural advantages which arise from the position of the earth which we inhabit with respect to the other planets afford much employment to mathematical speculation, by which it has been discovered that no other conformation of the system could have given such commodious distributions of light and heat, or imparted fertility and pleasure to so great a part of a revolving sphere. It may be perhaps observed by the moralist, with equal reason, that our globe seems particularly fitted for the residence of a being placed here only for a short time, whose task is to advance himself to a higher and happier state of existence by unremitted vigilance of caution and activity of virtue. The duties required of man are such as human nature does not willingly perform, and such as those are inclined to delay who yet intend some time to fulfil them. It was therefore necessary that this universal reluctance should be counteracted, and the drowsiness of hesitation wakened into resolve, that the danger of procrastination should be always in view, and the fallacies of security be hourly detected. To this end, all the appearances of nature uniformly conspire. Whatever we see on every side reminds us of the lapse of time and the flux of life. The day and night succeed each other. The rotation of seasons diversifies the year. The sun rises, attains the meridian, declines, and sets, and the moon every night changes its form. The day has been considered as an image of the year, and the year as a representation of life. The morning answers to the spring, and the spring to childhood and youth. The noon corresponds to the summer, and the summer to the strength of manhood. The evening is an emblem of autumn, and autumn of declining life. The night with its silence and darkness shows winter, in which all the powers of vegetation are benumbed, and the winter points out the time when life shall cease, with its hopes and pleasures. He that is carried forward, however swiftly, by a motion equable and easy, perceives not the change of place, but by the variation of objects. If the wheel of life, which rolls thus silently along, passed on through undistinguishable uniformity, we should never mark its approaches to the end of the course. If one hour were like another, if the passage of the sun did not show that the day is wasting, if the change of seasons did not impress upon us the flight of the year, quantities of duration equal to days and years would glide unobserved. If the parts of time were not variously coloured, we should never discern their departure or succession, but should live thoughtless of the past and careless of the future, without will, and perhaps without power, to compute the periods of life, or to compare the time which is already lost with that which may probably remain. But the course of time is so visibly marked that it is observed even by the birds of passage, and by nations who have raised their minds very little above animal instinct. There are human beings whose language does not supply them with words by which they can number 5, but I have read of none that have not names for day and night, for summer and winter. Yet it is certain that these admonitions of nature, however forcible, however importunate, are too often vain, and that many who mark with such accuracy the course of time appear to have little sensibility of the decline of life. Every man has something to do which he neglects. Every man has faults to conquer which he delays to combat. So little do we accustom ourselves to consider the effects of time, that things necessary and certain often surprise us like unexpected contingencies. We leave the beauty in her bloom, and after an absence of 20 years, wonder at our return to find her faded. We meet those whom we left children, and can scarcely persuade ourselves to treat them as men. The traveller visits in age those countries through which he rambled in his youth, and hopes for merriment at the old place. The man of business, wearied with unsatisfactory prosperity, retires to the town of his nativity, and expects to play away the last years with the companions of his childhood, and recover youth in the fields where he once was young. From this inattention, so general and so mischievous, let it be every man's study to exempt himself. Let him that desires to see others happy make haste to give while his gift can be enjoyed, and remember that every moment of delay takes something from the value of his benefaction. And let him who purposes his own happiness reflect that while he forms his purpose, the day rolls on, and the night cometh when no man can work. End of section 59. Section 60 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 60. Deborah Ginger's Account of City Wits. Saturday, March the 10th, 1759. To the Idler. Mr. Idler, I am the unfortunate wife of a city wit, and cannot but think that my cause may deserve equal compassion with any of those which have been represented in your paper. I married my husband within 3 months after the expiration of his apprenticeship. We put our money together and furnished a large and splendid shop, in which he was for 5 years and a half diligent and civil. The notice which curiosity or kindness commonly bestows on beginners was continued by confidence and esteem. One customer pleased with his treatment and his bargain recommended another, and we were busy behind the counter from morning till night. Thus every day increased our wealth and our reputation. My husband was often invited to dinner openly on the Exchange by £100,000 men, and whenever I went to any of the halls, the wives of the aldermen made me low curtsies. We always took up our notes before the day, and made all considerable payments by drafts upon our banker. you will easily believe that I was well enough pleased with my condition. For what happiness can be greater than that of growing every day richer and richer? I will not deny that, imagining myself likely to be in a short time the sheriff's lady, I broke off my acquaintance with some of my neighbours, and advised my husband to keep good company, and not to be seen with men that were worth nothing. In time he found that ale agreed with his constitution, and went every night to drink his pint at a tavern, where he met with a set of critics who disputed upon the merit of the different theatrical performers. By these idle fellows he was taken to the play, which at first he did not seem much to heed, for he owned that he very seldom knew what they were doing, and that while his companions would let him alone, he was commonly thinking on his last bargain. Having once gone, however, he went again and again, though I often told him that 3 shillings were thrown away. At last he grew uneasy if he missed a night, and importuned me to go with him. I went to a tragedy which they called Macbeth, and when I came home told him that I could not bear to see men and women make themselves such fools by pretending to be witches and ghosts, generals and kings, and to walk in their sleep when they were as much awake as those who looked at them. He told me that I must get higher notions, and that a play was the most rational of all entertainments, and most proper to relax the mind after the business of the day. By degrees he gained knowledge of some of the players, and when the play was over, very frequently treated them with suppers, for which he was admitted to stand behind the scenes. He soon began to lose some of his morning hours in the same folly, and was for one winter very diligent in his attendance on the rehearsals. But of this species of idleness he grew weary, and said that the play was nothing without the company. His ardour for the diversion of the evening increased. He bought a sword, and paid 5 shillings a night to sit in the boxes. He went sometimes into a place which he calls the green room, where all the wits of the age assemble, and when he had been there could do nothing for 2 or 3 days but repeat their jests, or tell their disputes. He has now lost his regard for everything but the playhouse. He invites 3 times a week one or other to drink claret and talk of the drama. His first care in the morning is to read the playbills, and if he remembers any lines of the tragedy which is to be represented, walks about the shop repeating them so loud and with such strange gestures that the passengers gather round the door. His greatest pleasure when I married him was to hear the situation of his shop commended, and to be told how many estates have been got in it by the same trade. But of late he grows peevish at any mention of business, and delights in nothing so much as to be told that he speaks like Mossop. Among his new associates he has learned another language, and speaks in such a strain that the neighbours cannot understand him. If a customer talks longer than he is willing to hear, he will complain that he has been excruciated with unmeaning verbosity. He laughs at the letters of his friends for their tameness of expression, and often declares himself weary of attending to the minutiae of a shop. It is well for me that I know how to keep a book, for of late he is scarcely ever in the way. Since one of his friends told him that he had a genius for tragic poetry, he has locked himself in an upper room 6 or 7 hours a day, and when I carry him any paper to be read or signed, I hear him talking vehemently to himself, sometimes of love and beauty, sometimes of friendship and virtue, but more frequently of liberty and his country. I would gladly, Mr. Idler, be informed what to think of a shopkeeper who is incessantly talking about liberty, a word which, since his acquaintance with polite life, my husband has always in his mouth. He is on all occasions afraid of our liberty. What can the man mean? I am sure he has liberty enough. It were better for him and me if his liberty was lessened. He has a friend, whom he calls a critic, that comes twice a week to read what he is writing. This critic tells him that his piece is a little irregular, but that some detached scenes will shine prodigiously, and that in the character of Bombulus he is wonderfully great. My scribbler then squeezes his hand, calls him the best of friends, thanks him for his sincerity, and tells him that he hates to be flattered. I've reason to believe that he seldom parts with his dear friend without lending him 2 guineas, and I'm afraid that he gave bail for him 3 days ago. By this course of life our credit as traders is lessened, and I cannot forbear to reflect that my husband's honour as a wit is not much advanced, for he seems to be always the lowest of the company, and is afraid to tell his opinion till the rest have spoken. When he was behind the counter he used to be brisk, active, and jocular, like a man that knew what he was doing, and did not fear to look another in the face. But among wits and critics he is timorous and awkward, and hangs down his head at his own table. Dear Mr. Idler, persuade him, if you can, to return once more to his native element. Tell him that his wit will never make him rich, but that there are places where riches will always make a wit. I am, sir, etc., Deborah Ginger. End of section 60.
Section 61 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 61, Minim the Critick, Part 1. Saturday, June 9th, 1759. Criticism is a study by which men grow important and formidable at a very small expense. The power of invention has been conferred by nature upon few, and the labor of learning those sciences which may by mere labor be obtained is too great to be willingly endured. But every man can exert such judgment as he has upon the works of others, and he whom nature has made weak, and idleness keeps ignorant, may yet support his vanity by the name of a critic. I hope it will give comfort to great numbers who are passing through the world in obscurity, when I inform them how easily distinction may be obtained. All the other powers of literature are coy and haughty. They must be long courted, and at last are not always gained. But criticism is a goddess easy of access and forward of advance, who will meet the slow and encourage the timorous. The want of meaning she supplies with words, and the want of spirit she recompenses with malignity. This profession has one recommendation peculiar to itself, that it gives vent to malignity without real mischief. No genius was ever blasted by the breath of critics. The poison which, if confined, would have burst the heart, fumes away in empty issues, and malice is set at ease with very little danger to merit. The critic is the only man whose triumph is without another's pain, and whose greatness does not rise upon another's ruin. To a study at once so easy and so reputable, so malicious and so harmless, it cannot be necessary to invite my readers by a long or labored exhortation. It is sufficient, since all would be critics if they could, to show by one eminent example that all can be critics if they will. Dick Minim, after the common course of puerile studies, in which he was no great proficient, was put apprentice to a brewer, with whom he had lived 2 years, when his uncle died in the city, and left him a large fortune in the stocks. Dick had for 6 months before used the company of the lower players, of whom he had learned to scorn a trade, and, being now at liberty to follow his genius, he resolved to be a man of wit and humor. That he might be properly initiated in his new character, he frequented the coffee-houses near the theatres, where he listened very diligently, day after day, to those who talked of language and sentiments, and unities and catastrophes, till, by slow degrees, he began to think that he understood something of the stage, and he hoped in time to talk himself. But he did not trust so much to natural sagacity as wholly to neglect the help of books. When the theatres were shut, he retired to Richmond with a few select writers, whose opinions he impressed upon his memory by unwearied diligence. And, when he returned with other wits to the town, he was able to tell in very proper phrases that the chief business of art is to copy nature, that a perfect writer is not to be expected because genius decays as judgment increases, that the great art is the art of blotting, and that, according to the rule of Horace, every piece should be kept 9 years. Of the great authors he now began to display the characters, laying down as an universal position that all had beauties and defects. His opinion was, that Shakespeare, committing himself wholly to the impulse of nature, wanted that correctness which learning would have given him, and that Johnson, trusting to learning, did not sufficiently cast his eyes on nature. He blamed the stanzas of Spenser, and could not bear the hexameters of Sidney. Denham and Waller he held the first reformers of English numbers, and thought that if Waller could have obtained the strength of Denham, or Denham the sweetness of Waller, there had been nothing wanting to complete a poet. He often expressed his commiseration of Dryden's poetry, and his indignation at the age which suffered him to write for bread. He repeated with rapture the first lines of All for Love, but wondered at the corruption of taste which could bear anything so unnatural as rhyming tragedies. In Otway he found uncommon powers of moving the passions, but was disgusted by his general negligence, and blamed him for making a conspirator his hero, and never concluded his disquisition without remarking how happily the sound of the clock is made to alarm the audience. Southern would have been his favorite, but that he mixes comic with tragic scenes, intercepts the natural course of the passions, and fills the mind with a wild confusion of mirth and melancholy. The versification of Rowe he thought too melodious for the stage, and too little varied in different passions. He made it the great fault of Congreve that all his persons were wits, and that he always wrote with more art than nature. He considered Cato rather as a poem than play, and allowed Addison to be the complete master of allegory and grave humor, but paid no great deference to him as a critic. He thought the chief merit of Prior was in his easy tales and lighter poems, though he allowed that his Solomon had many noble sentiments, elegantly expressed. In Swift he discovered an inimitable vein of irony, and an easiness which all would hope and few would attain. Pope he was inclined to degrade from a poet to a versifier, and thought his numbers rather luscious than sweet. He often lamented the neglect of Phaedra and Hippolytus, and wished to see the stage under better regulations. These assertions passed commonly uncontradicted, and if now and then an opponent started up, he was quickly repressed by the suffrages of the company, and Minim went away from every dispute with elation of heart and increase of confidence. He now grew conscious of his abilities, and began to talk of the present state of dramatic poetry, wondered what had become of the comic genius which supplied our ancestors with wit and pleasantry, and why no writer could be found that durst now venture beyond a farce. He saw no reason for thinking that the vein of humor was exhausted, since we live in a country where liberty suffers every character to spread itself to its utmost bulk, and which therefore produces more originals than all the rest of the world together. Of tragedy he concluded business to be the soul, and yet often hinted that love predominates too much upon the modern stage. He was now an acknowledged critic, and had his own seat in a coffee-house, and headed a party in the pit. Minim has more vanity than ill nature, and seldom desires to do much mischief. He will perhaps murmur a little in the ear of him that sits next him, but endeavors to influence the audience to favor, by clapping when an actor exclaims, "Ye gods," or laments the misery of his country. By degrees he was admitted to rehearsals, and many of his friends are of opinion that our present poets are indebted to him for their happiest thoughts. By his contrivance the bell was rung twice in Barbarossa, and by his persuasion the author of Cleone concluded his play without a couplet. For what can be more absurd, said Minim, that part of a play should be rhymed, and part written in blank verse? And by what acquisition of faculties is the speaker, who never could find rhymes before, enabled to rhyme at the conclusion of an act? He is the great investigator of hidden beauties, and is particularly delighted when he finds the sound an echo to the sense. He has read all our poets with particular attention to this delicacy of versification, and wonders at the supineness with which their works have been hitherto perused, so that no man has found the sound of a drum in this distich. When pulpit, drum ecclesiastic, was beat with fist instead of a stick. And that the wonderful lines upon honor and a bubble have hitherto passed without notice. Honor is like the glossy bubble, which cost philosophers such trouble, where one part cracked, the whole does fly, and wits are cracked to find out why. In these verses, says Minim, we have two striking accommodations of the sound to the sense. It is impossible to utter the first two lines emphatically without an act like that which they describe. Bubble and trouble, causing a momentary inflation of the cheeks by the retention of the breath, which is afterwards forcibly emitted, as in the practice of blowing bubbles. But the greatest excellence is in the third line, which is cracked in the middle to express a crack, and then shivers into monosyllables. Yet has this diamond lain neglected with common stones, and among the innumerable admirers of Hudibras the observation of this superlative passage has been reserved for the sagacity of Minim. End of section 61. Section 62 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 62. Minim the Critick II. Saturday, June 15th, 1759. Mr. Minim had now advanced himself to the zenith of critical reputation. When he was in the pit, every eye in the boxes was fixed upon him. When he entered his coffee-house, he was surrounded by circles of candidates, who passed their novitiate of literature under his tuition. His opinion was asked by all who had no opinion of their own, and yet loved to debate and decide, and no composition was supposed to pass in safety to posterity till it had been secured by Minim's approbation. Minim professes great admiration of the wisdom and munificence by which the academies of the continent were raised, and often wishes for some standard of taste, for some tribunal to which merit may appeal from caprice, prejudice, and malignity. He has formed a plan for an academy of criticism, where every work of imagination may be read before it is printed, and which shall authoritatively direct the theatres what pieces to receive or reject, to exclude or to revive. Such an institution would, in Dick's opinion, spread the fame of English literature over Europe, and make London the metropolis of elegance and politeness, the place to which the learned and ingenious of all countries would repair for instruction and improvement, and where nothing would any longer be applauded or endured that was not conformed to the nicest rules, and finished with the highest elegance. Till some happy conjunction of the planets shall dispose our princes or ministers to make themselves immortal by such an academy, Minim contents himself to preside 4 nights in a week in a critical society selected by himself, where he is heard without contradiction, and whence his judgment is disseminated through the great vulgar and the small. When he is placed in the chair of criticism, he declares loudly for the noble simplicity of our ancestors, in opposition to the petty refinements and ornamental luxuriance. Sometimes he is sunk in despair, and perceives false delicacy daily gaining ground, and sometimes brightens his countenance with a gleam of hope, and predicts the revival of the true sublime. He then fulminates his loudest censures against the monkish barbarity of rhyme, wonders how beings that pretend to reason can be pleased with one line always ending like another, tells how unjustly and unnaturally sense is sacrificed to sound, how often the best thoughts are mangled by the necessity of confining or extending them to the dimensions of a couplet, and rejoices that genius has, in our days, shaken off the shackles which had encumbered it so long. Yet he allows that rhyme may sometimes be born, if the lines be often broken, and the pauses judiciously diversified. From blank verse he makes an easy transition to Milton, whom he produces as an example of the slow advance of lasting reputation. Milton is the only writer in whose books Minim can read forever without weariness. What cause it is that exempts his pleasure from satiety he has long and diligently inquired, and believes it to consist in the perpetual variation of the numbers, by which the ear is gratified and the attention awakened. The lines that are commonly thought rugged and unmusical he conceives to have been written to temper the melodious luxury of the rest, or to express things by a proper cadence, for he scarcely finds a verse that has not this favorite beauty. He declares that he could shiver in a hothouse when he reads that the ground burns frore, and the cold performs the effect of fire; and that, when Milton bewails his blindness, the verse, "So thick a drop serene has quenched these orbs," has, he knows not how, something that strikes him with an obscure sensation like that which he fancies would be felt from the sound of darkness. Minim is not so confident of his rules of judgment as not very eagerly to catch new light from the name of the author. He is commonly so prudent as to spare those whom he cannot resist, unless, as will sometimes happen, he finds the public combined against them. But a fresh pretender to fame he is strongly inclined to censure, till his own honor requires that he commend him. Till he knows the success of a composition, he entrenches himself in general terms. There are some new thoughts and beautiful passages, but there is likewise much which he would have advised the author to expunge. He has several favorite epithets, of which he never settled the meaning, but which are very commodiously applied to books which he has not read, or cannot understand. One is manly, another is dry, another stiff, and another flimsy. Sometimes he discovers delicacy of style, and sometimes meets with strange expressions. He is never so great nor so happy as when a youth of promising parts is brought to receive his directions for the prosecution of his studies. He then puts on a very serious air. He advises the pupil to read none but the best authors, and, when he finds one congenial to his own mind, to study his beauties but avoid his faults, and, when he sits down to write, to consider how his favorite author would think at the present time, on the present occasion. He exhorts him to catch those moments when he finds his thoughts expanded and his genius exalted, but to take care lest imagination hurry him beyond the bounds of nature. He holds diligence the mother of success, yet enjoins him with great earnestness not to read more than he can digest, and not to confuse his mind by pursuing studies of contrary tendencies. He tells him that every man has his genius, and that Cicero could never be a poet. The boy retires illuminated, resolves to follow his genius, and to think how Milton would have thought. And Minim feasts upon his own beneficence, till another day brings another pupil. End of section 62.
Section 63 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Lankford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 63. Dick Shifter's Rural Excursion. Saturday, August 25th, 1759. Dick Shifter was born in Cheapside, and having passed reputably through all the classes of St. Paul's School, has been for some years a student in the Temple. He is of opinion that intense application dulls the faculties, and thinks it necessary to temper the severity of the law by books that engage the mind but do not fatigue it. He has therefore made a copious collection of plays, poems, and romances, to which he has recourse when he fancies himself tired with statutes and reports, and he seldom inquires very nicely whether he is weary or idle. Dick has received from his favorite authors very strong impressions of a country life, and though his furthest excursions have been to Greenwich on one side and Chelsea on the other, he has talked for several years with great pomp of language and elevation of sentiments, about a state too high for contempt and too low for envy, about homely quiet and blameless simplicity, pastoral delights, and rural innocence. His friends who had estates in the country often invited him to pass the summer among them, but something or other had always hindered him, and he considered that to reside in the house of another man was to incur a kind of dependence inconsistent with that laxity of life which he had imagined as the chief good. This summer he resolved to be happy, and procured a lodging to be taken for him at a solitary house, situated about 35 miles from London, on the banks of a small river, with cornfields before it, and a hill on each side covered with wood. He concealed the place of his retirement that none might violate his obscurity, and promised himself many a happy day when he should hide himself among the trees and contemplate the tumults and vexations of the town. He stepped into the post-chaise with his heart beating and his eyes sparkling, was conveyed through many variety of delightful prospects, saw hills and meadows, cornfields and pastures succeed each other, and for 4 hours charged none of his poets with fiction or exaggeration. He was now within 6 miles of happiness, when, having never felt so much agitation before, he began to wish his journey at an end, and the last hour was passed in changing his posture and quarrelling with his driver. An hour may be tedious, but cannot be long. He at length alighted at his new dwelling, and was received as he expected. He looked round upon the hills and rivulets, but his joints were stiff and his muscles sore, and his first request was to see his bedchamber. He rested well, and ascribed the soundness of his sleep to the stillness of the country. He expected from that time nothing but nights of quiet and days of rapture, and as soon as he had risen wrote an account of his new state to one of his friends in the temple. Dear Frank, I never pitied thee before. I am now as I could wish every man of wisdom and virtue to be, in the regions of calm content and placid meditation, with all the beauties of nature soliciting my notice, and all the diversities of pleasure courting my acceptance. The birds are chirping in the hedges, and the flowers blooming in the mead. The breeze is whistling in the wood, and the sun dancing on the water. I can now say with truth that a man capable of enjoying the purity of happiness is never more busy than in his hours of leisure, nor ever less solitary than in a place of solitude. I am, dear Frank, etc. When he had sent away his letter, he walked into the wood with some inconvenience, from the furze that pricked his legs, and the briars that scratched his face. He at last sat down under a tree, and heard with great delight a shower, by which he was now wet, rattling among the branches. This, said he, is the true image of obscurity. We hear of troubles and commotions, but never feel them. His amusement did not overpower the calls of nature, and he therefore went back to order his dinner. He knew that the country produces whatever is eaten or drunk, and imagining that he was now at the source of luxury, resolved to indulge himself with dainties which he supposed might be procured at a price next to nothing, if any price at all was expected, and intended to amaze the rustics with his generosity by paying more than they would ask. Of 20 dishes which he named, he was amazed to find that scarcely one was to be had, and heard with astonishment and indignation that all the fruits of the earth was sold at a higher price than in the streets of London. His meal was short and sullen, and he retired again to his tree to inquire how dearness could be consistent with abundance, or how fraud could be practised by simplicity. He was not satisfied with his own speculations, and returning home early in the evening went a while from window to window, and found that he wanted something to do. He inquired for a newspaper, and was told that farmers never minded news, but that they could send for it from the alehouse. A messenger was dispatched who ran away at full speed, but loitered an hour behind the hedges, and at last coming back with his feet purposely bemired, instead of expressing the gratitude which Mr. Shifter expected for the bounty of a shilling, said that the night was wet and the way dirty, and he hoped that his worship would not think it much to give him half a crown. Dick now went to bed with some abatement of his expectations. But sleep, I know not how, revives our hopes, and rekindles our desires. He rose early in the morning, surveyed the landscape, and was pleased. He walked out and passed from field to field without observing any beaten path, and wondered that he had not seen the shepherdesses dancing, nor heard the swains piping to their flocks. At last he saw some reapers and harvest women at dinner. Here, said he, are the true Arcadians, and advanced courteously towards them, as afraid of confusing them by the dignity of his presence. They acknowledged his superiority by no other token than that of asking him for something to drink. He imagined that he had now purchased the privilege of discourse, and began to descend to familiar questions, endeavoring to accommodate his discourse to the grossness of rustic understandings. The clowns soon found that he did not know wheat from rye, and began to despise him, One of the boys, by pretending to show him a bird's nest, decoyed him into a ditch, and one of the wenches sold him a bargain. This walk had given him no great pleasure, but he hoped to find other rustics less coarse of manners and less mischievous of disposition. Next morning he was accosted by an attorney, who told him that, unless he made Farmer Dobson satisfaction for trampling his grass, he had orders to indict him. Shifter was offended, but not terrified, and telling the attorney that he was himself a lawyer, talked so volubly of pettifoggers and barrators that he drove him away. Finding his walks thus interrupted, he was inclined to ride, and being pleased with the appearance of a horse that was grazing in a nearby meadow, inquired the owner, who warranted him sound, and would not sell him but that he was too fine for a plain man. Dick paid down the price, and riding out to enjoy the evening, fell with his new horse into a ditch. They got out with difficulty, and as he was going to mount again, a countryman looked at the horse and perceived him to be blind. Dick went to the seller and demanded back his money, but was told that a man who rented his ground must do the best for himself, that his landlord had his rent though the year was barren, and that whether horses had eyes or no, he should sell them to the highest bidder. Shifter now began to be tired with rustic simplicity, and on the 5th day took possession again of his chambers, and bade farewell to the regions of calm content and placid meditation. End of section 63. Recording by Anders Langford. Section 64 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Langford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 64. Steady, Snug, Startle, Solid, and Misty. Saturday, October 13th, 1759. I have passed the summer in one of these places to which a mineral spring gives the idle and luxurious an annual reason for resorting, whenever they fancy themselves offended by the heat of London. What is the true motive of this periodical assembly I have never yet been able to discover. The greater part of the visitants neither feel diseases nor fear them. What pleasure can be expected more than the variety of the journey I know not, for the numbers are too great for privacy, and too small for diversion. As each is known to be a spy upon the rest, they all live in continual restraint, and having but a narrow range for censure, they gratify its cravings by preying on one another. But every condition has some advantages. In this confinement, a smaller circle affords opportunities for more exact observation. The glass that magnifies its object contracts the sight to a point, and the mind must be fixed upon a single character to remark its minute peculiarities. The quality or habit which passes unobserved in the tumult of successive multitudes becomes conspicuous when it is offered to the notice day after day, and perhaps I have, without any distinct notice, seen thousands like my late companions, for when the scene can be varied at pleasure, a slight disgust turns us aside before a deep impression can be made upon the mind. There was a select set, supposed to be distinguished by superiority of intellects, who always passed the evening together. To be admitted to their conversation was the highest honor of the place. Many youths inspired to distinction by pretending to occasional invitations, and the ladies were often wishing to be men that they might partake the pleasures of learned society. I know not whether by merit or destiny I was soon after my arrival admitted to this envied party, which I frequented till I had learned the art by which each endeavored to support his character. Tom Steady was a vehement asserter of uncontroverted truth, and by keeping himself out of the reach of contradiction, had acquired all the confidence which the consciousness of irresistible abilities could have given. I was once mentioning a man of eminence, and after having recounted his virtues, endeavored to represent him fully by mentioning his faults. "Sir," said Mr. Steady, "that he has faults I can easily believe, for who is without them? No man, sir, is now alive among the innumerable multitudes that swarm upon the earth, however wise or however good, who has not, in some degree, his failings and his faults. If there be any man faultless, bring him forth into public view, show him openly, and let him be known. But I will venture to affirm, and, till the contrary be plainly show, shall always maintain that no such man is to be found. Tell not me, sir, of impeccability and perfection. Such talk is for those that are strangers in the world. I have seen several nations, and conversed with all ranks of people. I have known the great and the mean, the learned and the ignorant, the old and the young, the clerical and the lay. But I have never found a man without a fault, and I suppose shall die in the opinion that to be human is to be frail. To all this nothing could be opposed. I listened with a hanging head. Mr. Steady looked round on the hearers with triumph, and saw every eye congratulating his victory. He departed, and spent the next morning in following those who retired from the company, and telling them, with injunctions of secrecy, how poor Sprightly began to take liberties with men wiser than himself, but that he suppressed him by a decisive argument which put him totally to silence. Dick Snug is a man of sly remark, and pithy sensuousness. He never emerges himself in the stream of conversation, but lies to catch his companions in the eddy. He is often very successful in breaking narratives and confounding eloquence. A gentleman, giving the history of one of his acquaintances, made mention of a lady that had many lovers. Then, said Dick, she was either handsome or rich. This observation being well received, Dick watched the progress of the tale, and, hearing of a man lost in a shipwreck, remarked that no man was ever drowned upon dry land. Will Startle is a man of exquisite sensibility, whose delicacy of frame and quickness of discernment subject him to impressions from the slightest causes, and who therefore passes his life between rapture and horror, in quiverings of delight or convulsions of disgust. His emotions are too violent for many words. His thoughts are always discovered by exclamations. Vile, odious, horrid, detestable, and sweet, charming, delightful, astonishing, compose almost his whole vocabulary, which he utters with various contortions and gesticulations not easily related or described. Jack Solid is a man of much reading who utters nothing but quotations, but having been, I suppose, too confident of his memory, he has for some time neglected his books, and his stock grows every day more scanty. Mr. Solid has found an opportunity every night to repeat from Hudibras, "Doubtless the pleasure is as great of being cheated as to cheat," and from Waller, "Poets lose half the praise they would have got, were it but known that they discreetly blot." Dick Misty is a man of deep research and forcible penetration. Others are content with superficial appearances, but Dick holds that there is no effect without a cause, and values himself upon his power of explaining the difficult and displaying the abstruse. Upon a dispute among us which of two young strangers was more beautiful, "You," says Mr. Misty, turning to me, "like Amaranthia better than Chloris. I do not wonder at the preference, for the cause is evident. There is in man a perception of harmony, and a sensibility of perfection, which touches the finer fibres of the mental texture, and before reason can descend from her throne to pass her sentence upon the things compared, drives us toward the object proportioned to our faculties, by an impulse gentle yet irresistible. For the harmonic system of the universe and the reciprocal magnetism of similar natures are always operating towards conformity and union. Nor can the powers of the soul cease from agitation till they find something on which they can repose." To this nothing was opposed, and Amaranthia was acknowledged to excel Chloris. Of the rest you may expect an account from, Sir, yours, Robin Sprightly. End of section 64. Recording by Anders Langford. Section 65. of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anders Langford. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 65. Biography. How Best Performed. Saturday, November 24th, 1759. Biography is, of the various kinds of narrative writing, that which is most eagerly read, and most easily applied to the purposes of life. In romances, when the wide field of possibility lies open to invention, the incidents may easily be made more numerous, the vicissitudes more sudden, and the events more wonderful. But from the time of life when fancy begins to be overruled by reason and corrected by experience, the most artful tale raises little curiosity when it is known to be false. Though it may, perhaps, be sometimes read as a model of a neat or elegant style, nor for the sake of knowing what it contains, but how it is written. Or those that are weary of themselves may have recourse to it as a pleasing dream, of which, when they awake, they voluntarily dismiss the images from their minds. The examples and events of history press, indeed, upon the mind with the weight of truth. But when they are reposited in the memory, they are oftener employed for show than use, and rather diversify conversation than regulate life. Few are engaged in such scenes as give them opportunities of growing wiser by the downfall of statesmen or the defeat of generals. The stratagems of war and the intrigues of courts are read by far the greater part of mankind with the same indifference as the adventures of fabled heroes, or the revolutions of a fairy region. Between falsehood and useless truth there is little difference. As gold which he cannot spend will make no man rich, so knowledge which he cannot apply will make no man wise. The mischievous consequences of vice and folly, of irregular desires and predominant passions, are best discovered by those relations which are levelled with the general surface of life, which tell not how any man became great, but how he was made happy, not how he lost the favor of his prince, but how he became discontented with himself. Those relations are therefore commonly of most value in which the writer tells his own story. He that recounts the life of another commonly dwells most upon conspicuous events, lessens the familiarity of his tale to increase its dignity, shews his favorite at a distance, decorated and magnified like the ancient actors in their tragic dress, and endeavors to hide the man that he may produce a hero. But if it be true, which was said by a French prince, that no man was a hero to the servants of his chamber, it is equally true that every man is yet less a hero to himself. He that is most elevated above the crowd by the importance of his employments, or the reputation of his genius, feels himself affected by fame or business, but as they influence his domestic life. The high and low, as they have the same faculties and the same senses, have no less similitude in their pains and pleasures. The sensations are the same in all, though produced by very different occasions. The prince feels the same pain when an invader seizes a province, as the farmer when a thief drives away his cow. Men thus equal in themselves will appear equal in honest and impartial biography, and those whom fortune or nature places at the greatest distance may afford instruction to each other. The writer of his own life has at least the first qualification of an historian, the knowledge of the truth. And though it may be plausibly objected that his temptations to disguise it are equal to his opportunities of knowing it, yet I cannot but think that impartiality may be expected, with equal confidence from him that relates the passages of his own life, as from him that delivers the transactions of another. Certainty of knowledge not only excludes mistake, but fortifies veracity. What we collect by conjecture, and by conjecture only can one man judge of another's motives or sentiments, is easily modified by fancy or by desire, as objects imperfectly discerned take forms from the hope or fear of the beholder. But that which is fully known cannot be falsified, but with reluctance of understanding, and alarm of conscience. Of understanding, the lover of truth. Of conscience, the sentinel of virtue. He that writes the life of another is either his friend or his enemy, and wishes either to exalt his praise or aggravate his infamy. Many temptations to falsehood will occur in the disguise of passions, too specious to fear much resistance. Love of virtue will animate panegyric, and hatred of wickedness embitter censure. The zeal of gratitude, the ardor of patriotism, fondness for an opinion, or fidelity to a party, may easily overpower the vigilance of a man habitually well disposed, and prevail over unassisted and unfriended veracity. But he that speaks of himself has no motive to falsehood or partiality, except self-love, by which all have so often been betrayed that all are on the watch against its artifices. He that writes an apology for a single action, to confute an accusation, to recommend himself to favor, is indeed always to be suspected of favoring his own cause. But he that sits down calmly and voluntarily to review his life for the admonition of posterity, or to amuse himself, and leaves this account unpublished, may be commonly presumed to tell truth, since falsehood cannot appease his own mind, and fame will not be heard beneath the tomb. End of section 65. Recording by Anders Lankford.
Section 66 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruhi Hutt. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 66, Books Multiplied by Useless Compilations. Saturday, December 1, 1759. One of the peculiarities which distinguish the present age is the multiplication of books. Every day brings new advertisements of literary undertakings, and we are flattered with repeated promises of growing wise on easier terms than our progenitors. How much either happiness or knowledge is advanced by this multitude of authors is not very easy to decide. He that teaches us anything which we knew not before is undoubtedly to be reverenced as a master. He that conveys knowledge by more pleasing ways may very properly be loved as a benefactor, and he that supplies life with innocent amusement will be certainly caressed as a pleasing companion. But few of those who fill the world with books have any pretensions to the hope either of pleasing or instructing. They have often no other task than to lay 2 books before them, out of which they compile a third, without any new materials of their own, and with very little application of judgment to those which former authors have supplied. That all compilations are useless I do not assert. Particles of science are often very widely scattered. Writers of extensive comprehension have incidental remarks upon topics very remote from the principal subject, which are often more valuable than formal treatises, and which yet are not known because they are not promised in the tide. He that collects those under proper heads is very laudably employed, for though he exerts no great abilities in the work, he facilitates the progress of others, and by making that easy of attainment which is already written, may give some mind, some vigorous or more adventurous than his own, leisure for new thoughts and original designs. But the collections poured lately from the press have seldom made at any great expense of time or inquiry, and therefore only serve to distract choice without supplying any real want. It is observed that a corrupt society has many laws. I know not whether it is not equally true that an ignorant age has many books. When the treasures of ancient knowledge lie unexamined, and original authors are neglected and forgotten, compilers and plagiaries are encouraged, who give us again what we have had before, and grow great by setting before us what our own sloth had hidden from our view. Yet are not even these writers to be indiscriminately censured and rejected. Truth, like beauty, varies its fashions, and is best recommended by different dresses to different minds, and he that recalls the attention of mankind to any part of learning which time has left behind it, may be truly said to advance the literature of his own age. As the manners of nations vary, new topics of persuasion become necessary, and new combinations of imagery are produced, and he that can accommodate himself to the reigning state may always have readers who perhaps would not have looked upon better performances. To exact of every man who writes that he should say something new would be to reduce authors to a small number. To oblige the most fertile genius to say only what is new would be to contract his volumes to a few pages. Yet surely there ought to be some bounds to repetition. Libraries ought no more to be heaped forever with the same thoughts differently expressed than with the same books differently decorated. The good or evil which these secondary writers produce is seldom of any long duration. As they owe their existence to change of fashion, they commonly disappear when a new fashion becomes prevalent. The authors that in any action last from age to age are very few, because there are very few that have any other claim to notice than catch a hold on present curiosity and gratify some accidental desire, or produce some temporary conveniency. But however the writers of the day may despair of future fame, they ought at least to forbear any present mischief. Though they cannot arrive at eminent heights of excellence, they might keep themselves harmless. They might take care to inform themselves before they attempt to inform others, and exert the little influence which they have for honest purposes. But such is the present state of our literature, that the ancient sage, who thought a great book a great evil, would now think the multitude of books a multitude of evils. He would consider a bulky writer who engrossed a year, and a swarm of pamphleteers who stole each hour, as equal wasters of human life, and would make no other difference between them than between a beast of prey and a flight of locusts. End of section 66. Section 67 of the Selected Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruhi Haq. Selected Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 66. What have ye done? Saturday, December 22nd, 1759. When the philosophers of the last age were first congregated into the Royal Society, great expectations were raised of the sudden progress of useful arts. The time was supposed to be near when engines should turn up by a perpetual motion, and health be secured by the universal medicine, when learning should be facilitated by a real character, and commerce extended by ships which could reach their ports in defiance of the tempest. But improvement is naturally slow. The society met and parted without any visible diminution of the miseries of life. The gout and stone were still painful. The ground that was not ploughed brought no harvest, and neither oranges nor grapes would grow upon the hawthorn. At last, those who were disappointed began to be angry. Those likewise who hated innovation were glad to gain an opportunity of ridiculing men who had depreciated, perhaps with too much arrogance, the knowledge of antiquity, and it appears from some of their earliest apologies that the philosophers felt with great sensibility the unwelcome importunities of those who were daily asking, "What have ye done?" The truth is that little had been done compared with what fame had been suffered to promise, and the question could now only be answered by general apologies and by new hopes, which, when they were frustrated, gave a new occasion to the same vexatious inquiry. This fatal question has disturbed the quiet of many other minds. He that in the latter part of his life too strictly inquires what he has done, can very seldom receive from his own heart such an account as will give him satisfaction. We do not indeed so often disappoint others as ourselves. We do not only think more highly than others of our own abilities, but allow ourselves to form hopes which we never communicate, and please our thoughts with employments which none ever will allot us, and with elevations to which we are never expected to rise. And when our days and years have passed away in common business or common amusements, and we find at last that we have suffered our purposes to sleep till the time of action is past, we are reproached only by our own reflections. Neither our friends nor our enemies wonder that we live and die like the rest of mankind, that we live without notice and die without memorial. They know not what task we had proposed, and therefore cannot discern whether it is finished. He that compares what he has done with what he has left undone will feel the effect which must always follow the comparison of imagination with reality. He will look with contempt on his own unimportance, and wonder to what purpose he came into the world. He will repine that he shall leave behind him no evidence of his having been, that he has added nothing to the system of life, but has glided from youth to age among the crowd, without any effort for distinction. Man is seldom willing to let fall the opinion of his own dignity, or to believe that he does little only because every individual is a very little being. He is better content to want diligence than power, and sooner confesses the depravity of his will than the imbecility of his nature. From this mistaken notion of human greatness it proceeds that many who tend to have made great advances in wisdom so loudly declare that they despise themselves. If I had ever found any of the self-contemners much irritated or pained by the consciousness of their meanness, I should have given them consolation by observing that a little more than nothing is as much as can be expected from a being who, with respect to the multitudes about him, is himself little more than nothing. Every man is obliged by the Supreme Master of the universe to improve all the opportunities of good which are afforded him, and to keep in continual activity such abilities as are bestowed upon him. But he has no reason to repine, though his abilities are small and his opportunities few. He that has improved the virtue or advanced the happiness of one fellow creature, he that has ascertained a single moral proposition, or added one useful experiment to natural knowledge, may be contented with his own performance, and, with respect to mortals like himself, may demand, like Augustus, to be dismissed at his departure with applause. End of Section 67. Section 68 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruhi Haq. The Essays of Samuel Johnson. Section 68. Omar's Plan of Life. Saturday, March 22nd, 1760. Omar, the son of Hussein, had passed 75 years in honour and prosperity. The favour of 3 successive caliphs had filled his house with gold and silver, and whenever he appeared, the benedictions of the people proclaimed his passage. Terrestrial happiness is of short continuance. The brightness of the flame is wasting its fuel. Fragrant flower is passing away in its own odours. The vigour of Umar began to fail. The curls of beauty fell from his head. Strength departed from his hands, and agility from his feet. He gave back to the Caliph the keys of trust and the seals of secrecy, and sought no other pleasure for the remains of life than the converse of the wise and the gratitude of the good. The powers of his mind were yet unimpaired. His chamber was filled with visitants, eager to catch the dictates of experience, and officious to pay the tribute of admiration. Khalid, the son of the Viceroy of Egypt, entered every day early and retired late. He was beautiful and eloquent. Omar admired his wit and loved his docility. "Tell me," said Khalid, "thou to whose voice nations have listened, and whose wisdom is known to the extremities of Asia, tell me how I may resemble Umar the prudent. The arts by which you have gained power and preserved it are to you no longer necessary or useful. Impart to me the secret of your conduct, and teach me the plan upon which your wisdom has built your fortune." "Young man," said Omar, "it is of little use to form plans of life. When I took my first survey of the world in my 20th year, having considered the various conditions of mankind, in the hour of solitude, I said thus to myself, leaning against a cedar which spread its branches over my head, 70 years are allowed to a man. I have yet 50 remaining. 10 years I will allot to the attainment of knowledge, and 10 I will pass in foreign countries. I shall be learned, and therefore shall be honoured. Every city will shout at my arrival, and every student will solicit my friendship. 20 years thus passed will store my mind with images which I shall be busy through the rest of my life in combining and comparing. I shall revel in inexhaustible accumulations of intellectual riches. I shall find new pleasures for every moment, and shall never more be weary of myself. I will, however, not deviate too far from the beaten track of life, but will try what can be found in female delicacy. I will marry a wife beautiful as the Houris and wise as Zubaydah. With her I will live 20 years within the suburbs of Baghdad, in every pleasure that wealth can purchase and fancy can invent. I will then retire to a rural dwelling, pass my last days in obscurity and contemplation, and lie silently down on the bed of death. Through my life it shall be my settled resolution that I will never depend upon the smile of princes, that I will never stand exposed to the artificers of courts. I will never pant for public honours, nor disturb my quiet with affairs of state. Such was my scheme of life, which I impressed indelibly upon my memory. The first part of my ensuing time was to be spent in search of knowledge, and I know not how I was diverted from my design. I had no visible impediments without, nor any ungovernable passions within. I regarded knowledge as the highest honour and the most engaging pleasure, yet day stole upon day, and month glided after month, till I found that 7 years of the first 10 had vanished, and left nothing behind them. I now postponed my purpose of travelling, for why should I go abroad while so much remained to be learned at home? I immured myself for 4 years, and studied the laws of the empire. The fame of my skill reached the judges. I was found able to speak upon doubtful questions, and was commanded to stand at the footstool of the Caliph. I was heard with attention, I was consulted with confidence, and the love of praise fastened on my heart. I still wished to see distant countries, listened with rapture to the relations of travellers, and resolved some time to ask my dismission, that I might feast my soul with novelty. But my presence was always necessary, and the stream of business hurried me along. Sometimes I was afraid lest I should be charged with ingratitude, but I still proposed to travel, and therefore would not confine myself by marriage. In my 50th year I began to suspect that the time of travelling was past, and thought it best to lay hold on the felicity yet in my power, and indulge myself in domestic pleasures. But at 50 no man easily finds a woman beautiful as the Houris and wise as Zubaydah. I inquired and rejected, consulted and deliberated, till the 62nd year made me ashamed of gazing upon girls. I had now nothing left but retirement, and for retirement I never found a time, till disease forced me from public employment. Such was my scheme, and such has been its consequence. With an insatiable thirst for knowledge I trifled away the years of improvement. With a restless desire of seeing different countries, I have always resided in the same city. With the highest expectation of connubial felicity, I have lived unmarried, and with unalterable resolutions of contemplative retirement, I am going to die within the walls of Baghdad. End of section 68.
Section 69 of the Essays of Samuel Johnson. This is a LibriVox recording, or LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Essays of Samuel Johnson, Section 69. The Itch of Writing, Universal. The Adventurer, Tuesday, December the 11th, 1753. Scribimus indocti, doctique. Horace. All dare to write who can or cannot read. They who have attentively considered the history of mankind know that every age has its peculiar character. At one time no desire is felt but for military honours. Every summer affords battles and sieges, and the world is filled with ravage, bloodshed, and devastation. This sanguinary fury at length subsides, and nations are divided into factions by controversies about points that will never be decided. Men then grow weary of debate and altercation, and apply themselves to the arts of profit. Trading companies are formed, manufactures improved, and navigation extended, and nothing is any longer thought on but the increase and preservation of property, the artifices of getting money, and the pleasures of spending it. The present age, if we consider chiefly the state of our own country, may be styled with great propriety the age of authors, for perhaps there never was a time in which men of all degree of ability, of every kind of education, of every profession and employment, were posting with ardour so general to the press. The province of writing was formerly left to those who by study, or the appearance of study, were supposed to have gained knowledge unattainable by the busy part of mankind. But in these enlightened days every man is qualified to instruct every other man. And he that beats the anvil or guides the plough, not content with supplying corporal necessities, amuses himself in the hours of leisure with providing intellectual pleasures for his countrymen. It may be observed that of this, as of other evils, complaints have been made by every generation. But though it may perhaps be true that at all times more have been willing than have been able to write, yet there is no reason for believing that the dogmatical legions of the present race were ever equalled in number by any former period, for so widely is spread the itch of literary praise, that almost every man is an author, either in act or in purpose, has either bestowed his favours on the public, or withholds them that they may be more seasonably offered, or made more worthy of acceptance. In former times the pen, like the sword, was considered as consigned by nature to the hands of men. The ladies contented themselves with private virtues and domestic excellence, and a female writer, like a female warrior, was considered as a kind of eccentric being, that deviated, however illustriously, from her due sphere of motion, and was therefore rather to be gazed at with wonder than countenanced by imitation. But as the times past are said to have been a nation of Amazons, who drew the bow and wielded the battle axe, formed encampments and wasted nations, the revolution of years has now produced a generation of Amazons of the pen, who, with the spirit of their predecessors, have set masculine tyranny at defiance, asserted their claim to the regions of science, and seem resolved to contest the usurpations of virility. Some indeed there are of both sexes who are authors only in desire, but have not yet attained the power of executing their intentions, whose performances have not arrived at bulk sufficient to form a volume, or who have not the confidence, however impatient of nameless obscurity, to solicit openly the assistance of the printer, Among these are the innumerable correspondents of public papers, who are always offering assistance which no man will receive, and suggesting hints that are never taken, and who complain loudly of the perverseness and arrogance of authors, lament their insensibility of their own interest, and fill the coffee houses with dark stories of performances by eminent hands that have been offered and rejected. To what cause this universal eagerness of writing can be properly ascribed, I have not yet been able to discover. It is said that every art is propagated in proportion to the rewards conferred upon it, a position from which a stranger would naturally infer that literature was now blessed with patronage far transcending the candour or munificence of the Augustan age, that the road to greatness was open to none but authors, and that by writing alone riches and honour were to be obtained. But since it is true that writers, like other competitors, are very little disposed to favour one another, it is not to be expected that at a time when every man writes, any man will patronize. And accordingly there is not one that I can recollect at present who professes the least regard for the votaries of science, invites the addresses of learned men, or seems to hope for reputation from any pen but his own. The cause, therefore, of this epidemical conspiracy for the destruction of paper must remain a secret, nor can I discover whether we owe it to the influence of the constellations or the intemperature of seasons, whether the long continuance of the wind at any single point, or intoxicating vapours exhaled from the earth, have turned our nobles and our peasants, our soldiers and traders, our men and women, all into wits, philosophers and writers. It is indeed of more importance to search out the cure than the cause of this intellectual malady, and he will deserve well of his country, who, instead of amusing himself with conjectural speculations, should find means of persuading the peer to inspect his steward's accounts, or repair the rural mansion of his ancestors, who could replace the tradesman behind his counter, and send back the farmer to the mattock and the flail. General irregularities are known in time to remedy themselves. By the constitution of ancient Egypt, the priesthood was continually increasing, till at length there was no people beside themselves. The establishment was then dissolved, and the number of priests was reduced and limited. Thus amongst us, writers will perhaps be multiplied till no readers will be found, and then the ambition of writing must necessarily cease. But as it will be long before the cure is thus gradually effected, and the evil should be stopped, if it be possible, before it rises to so great a height, I could wish that both sexes would fix their thoughts upon some salutary considerations which might repress their ardour for that reputation which not one of many thousands is fated to obtain. Let it be deeply impressed and frequently recollected that he who has not obtained the proper qualifications of an author can have no excuse for the arrogance of writing, but the power of imparting to mankind something necessary to be known. A man uneducated or unlettered may sometimes start a useful thought, or make a lucky discovery, or obtain by chance some secret of nature, or some intelligence of facts of which the most enlightened mind may be ignorant, and which it is better to reveal, though by a rude and unskilful communication, than to lose for ever by suppressing it. But few will be justified by this plea, for of the innumerable books and pamphlets that have overflowed the nation, scarce one has made any addition to real knowledge, or contained more than a transposition of common sentiments and a repetition of common phrases. It will be naturally inquired, when the man who feels an inclination to write may venture to suppose himself properly qualified, and since every man is inclined to think well of his own intellect, by what test he may try his abilities without hazarding the contempt or resentment of the public. The first qualification of a writer is a perfect knowledge of the subject which he undertakes to treat, since we cannot teach what we do not know, nor can properly undertake to instruct others while we are ourselves in want of instruction. The next requisite is that he be master of the language in which he delivers his sentiments. If he treats of science and demonstration, that he has attained a style clear, pure, nervous, and expressive. If his topics be probable and persuasory, that he be able to recommend them by the superaddition of elegance and imagery, to display the colours of varied diction, and pour forth the music of modulated periods. If it be again inquired upon what principles any man shall conclude that he wants these powers, it may be readily answered that no end is attained but by the proper means. He only can rationally presume that he understands a subject who has read and compared the writers that have hitherto discussed it, familiarized their arguments to himself by long meditation, consulted the foundations of different systems, and separated truth from error by a rigorous examination. In like manner, he only has a right to suppose that he can express his thoughts, whatever they are, with perspicuity or elegance, who has carefully perused the best authors, accurately noted their diversities of style, diligently selected the best modes of diction, and familiarized them by long habits of attentive practice. No man is a rhetorician or philosopher by chance. He who knows that he undertakes to write on questions which he has never studied, may without hesitation determine that he is about to waste his own time and that of his reader, and expose himself to the derision of those whom he aspires to instruct. He that, without forming his style by the study of the best models, hastens to obtrude his compositions on the public, may be certain that, whatever hope or flattery may suggest, he shall shock the learned ear with barbarisms, and contribute, wherever his work shall be received, to the depravation of taste and the corruption of language. End of section 69. End of the Essays of Samuel Johnson by Samuel Johnson.